Welcome back to the channel. This is Trady Storm, and you are watching first part of What If Kid Naruto Was Bloodthirsty Demon. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Vegetables didn't appeal to Naruto Uzumaki. His nose wanted to grow backwards into his head and smell his brain because, surely, that was better than this. They were either tastelessly bland or so full of awful flavor. A thin-mouthed Ayame Ichiraku brought him this plate of fresh, leafy greens, with her father standing comfortingly behind her. "Come on, Naruto-chan, I know you can manage this." The rawness of them was odorous to him. The carrots weren't too horrible. Like onions, they were tolerable when cooked and salted. However, the girl, who had no idea who she was interacting with, his tricks weren't just for people who didn't pay attention to him, had piled the platter high with tomatoes, lettuce, grass, tiny radishes cut into squares, and pink skin that was bleeding into the white. The spice cut his nose, even from its manageable distance on the table. Naruto had initially enjoyed tomatoes. Their fleshy juice squirted into his mouth, and they were plump and a delicious red. He recognized the sensation as divine before he had even tasted it. Then the taste hit him, covering bitter and bland, and he never touched one again. His biggest letdown was them. Naturally, ramen was the source of relief. It's warm, liquid, has noodles for filling, and probably contains meat. Salty above all. Since that incident, this was the closest he had come to satiation. However, they never, ever discussed it. Hokage Gigi had warned him to keep it to himself at all costs, and he had complied because he was so afraid of getting into trouble, and Ichiraku's was the only place to get the richest, fattiest ramen, with the longest noodles and the juiciest meat. If he could hold down a plate of rabbit food, Ayame would give him half-priced ramen for a week. Biting into a tomato, Naruto forced himself to ignore the taste and concentrate on the texture. The feel of the skin bursting at his teeth, the water flowing into his mouth, the fake meat squishing between his jaws, while suppressing the bile that welled up in his throat at the idea of eating anything on the plate without any accompaniment. He reminded himself, "Think salty, this is a mouthful of noodles, and a handful of leaves," but he had no idea what that was. He covered the feeling with cucumbers, which were almost like tomatoes, but he was more cautious and was not disappointed. "Think meat," he told himself, and it worked much more effectively. The fantasy then took a turn for the worse due to the rapid transformation of cooked meat into raw meat, watery tomato juice into something darker and richer, and white radish into something else white. Ignoring the satisfying sensation of crushing a carrot between his back teeth or removing the skin from a cucumber stick between his front teeth, he concentrated on finishing the plate rather than thinking about how this was wrong. Wrong. When he finished, he felt too full of nothing and his stomach questioned why he had done it, but he smiled shakily at a beaming Ayame. "There, that wasn't so hard, was it?" With a pair of chopsticks in hand, he exclaimed, "Ramen." The shopkeeper and his daughter moved to prepare something special for the occasion. Naruto let out a sigh, "But if you do, stop," and vomited cleanly on the floor, tasting the acid as well as the tomatoes, radishes, carrots, cucumbers, and, damn, even the lettuce, which this time had some taste. He looked closely at the vomit, wondering absently what would happen next. He looked up at the old man shaking his head and Ayame covering her mouth with her hands. As he carefully scooped the mess into the trash and kicked some dirt up over the stain, the man said, "Next time, let's not force it, huh? Come on, Naruto, let's get you to the hospital." The hospital didn't appeal to Naruto either as long as it wasn't vegetables. Getting Naruto to eat wasn't difficult. When he was younger, he always ate more than he should have, intending to become a big, powerful ninja. Grains, meat, and milk all went in just fine, though perhaps with too much salt or sweetener. He decided to lick it to clean up the large cut he had received from a kunai he was practicing with. One day he did this because he thought spit was good for cuts, but really because he saw a real ninja doing it, and ninjas were awesome, and he found that the blood tasted really good. No, for other people he shouldn't have hurt his fellow Konoha shinobi, and cuts hurt. He was fair game, though, so he kept cutting and licking a little more each day until he unintentionally dozed off in class and remained unconscious for the entire day. He was in the hospital when he awoke, and the Hokage introduced him to Inoko Yamanaka, who questioned him extensively about the villagers, his schoolteachers, and his school friends. He was eventually released with some very harsh warnings to stop hurting himself, that it was not acceptable to drink blood, and that he should really try to be friends with the other kids. 6 years passed before he realized that animals were not people. Food had run out until he had only a can of tuna and a piece of rock-hard bread left. He had spent the majority of his money on old scrolls, and the unfortunate bird that chose to perch on his windowsill was just plain foolish. He consumed it more quickly than he did ramen, and he inhaled it in a messy, compulsive manner. He ripped out the digestive tract and sucked the stain from his fingers, just like he had done all his life, and he cleaned away the feathers in the same manner that he cleaned away ramen containers after breakfast. He went hunting the following day, made his way to the woods, and waited for a rabbit to dart by him. He watched as the whitetail vanished into the bushes at a rapid pace, but not quickly enough, since he was holding it by the legs, struggling, clawing, and causing more red lines to appear on his own skin. He also took the rabbit's head, which he knew was twisted and not quite right. Nobody cared if his teeth grew longer, no one noticed if his nails became harder and sharper, everyone noticed if he appeared happier, more energized, was playing tricks, and was giving it his all. He had a purpose. His first friend was about to be made. It turned out that his first friendship developed because Naruto desperately needed to hide his love of one thing in particular, rather than because they both enjoyed the same things. He was watched by Hinata Hyuga. She saw him put forth his best effort in class and, when he failed, get back up smiling. I watched him act goofy by painting teachers' seats and sprinkling water on snobby girls. He was ignored when he attempted to make friends with the strongest. Sasuke Uchiha saw him attempt to make friends with the smartest person, Sakura Haruno, but be turned down. I wondered what he had done wrong as I watched him watch them. Watched him use target practice in the woods to burn off the stress training. He looked up to see who had followed him after she bumped into a bush, and I saw target practice turn into more of a horror show. Waited while he observed her. She assumed it was for screaming for more rejection, followed by her ignoring him at school tomorrow. She wasn't like Sakura or Sasuke, though she desired to play, converse, and train with Naruto. She then presented him with a white handkerchief and said, "Why, you've got SS something on your FA face." And he took it from her, revealing surprise as the red faded. "I'm Hinata." He smiled, his teeth flecked with blood, and said, "I'm Naruto. Wanna be friends?" The idea of dead things had long since ceased to make Hinata's stomach turn. This might have been due to the fact that she was a kunoichi in training, or that it was her fourth consecutive month of arranging raw meat in a bento for her crush. She could tolerate small amounts of anything Naruto asked her to try, just so he wouldn't feel bad for eating like an animal, and she didn't mind blood any more than soy sauce. Just think, he only ate one meal a day after school before they met because he couldn't find a way to get out of school to get lunch without getting soiled. He was fortunate that Hinata had insulated lunchboxes and was prepared to face intense scrutiny from people who saw her working in the kitchen in the morning to feed him. When it became clear that she didn't have many issues with his diet, his initial feelings of gratitude and discomfort vanished. The first is that it was irregular and he could not possibly be eating enough with only one meal per day. The second is that they couldn't share it like true best friends could, and when Naruto did share, it was somewhat of a chore for her to keep it down. The drunk civilian's attack on Naruto was more of a catalyst than an actual event. You lost it when your worst fears were shouted directly into your face, for some reason. A weary Hokage and Iruka were waiting for Naruto to have another conversation when he woke up in the hospital. "I swear, I didn't mean to do it, I just when he said what I couldn't see. I'm really sorry, cried Naruto, looking scared. "Calm down, Naruto," the Hokage said sternly. "What do you remember from what happened? We are not upset with you." All of it, he thought the man's cries as Naruto approached him, the way his fear filled the clearing, the way he tasted. The horror of Hinata. "I remember eating," said Naruto, shaking his head. And wasn't that a tempting thought? Unlike vegetables, the thought did not make his stomach turn. The heap of flesh that had been consumed by alcohol was simply food. It wasn't a friend, a person, or anyone. Food that was unable to resist or even flee. It's not sickening. However, it was a person he killed, and he was aware that ninjas frequently killed bad guys. The man was a bad guy, but he ate him after killing him, which was unacceptable. "Yes," the Hokage replied, observing him intently, "but you didn't attack Hinata." Blinking, Naruto said, "Of course not. Were you aware that Hinata wouldn't attack you?" "Why yeah. But it was Hinata. Why would I?" "Naruto, the point of these questions is to make sure you aren't a danger to Konoha Nin. We want to have you as a genin, but if you can't control yourself, it's going to be hard to have you as a shinobi," Iruka said with a smile. The Hokage remarked around his pipe, more to the point, "You will have to be monitored and confined for the safety of Konoha." Naruto blinked the tears from his eyes as he felt the weight of all the insults directed at him build up inside his chest like a lead weight. "I'm sorry," he grumbled, "I didn't mean to. I've been eating animals and the lunches Hinata-chan prepares for me." "You know Hinata?" inquired Sarutobi. Then Iruka said, "Ah, they're friends at school." He let out a puff of smoke and said, "I see, she knows the secret?" Naruto gave a nod. The Hokage called, "Let her in," and a minute or so later the room's door opened. With her face concealed by her bangs and sleeves, Hinata shuffled in. She smiled back at Naruto, who was able to wave at her. According to the Sandame, "Hyuga-san, please take a seat." She stumbled over to sit at the foot of the bed, which was the only place to sit other than on the floor, and Naruto pushed her with his foot. Hey, hi. The story then started how an infant Naruto Uzumaki's fate was sealed in a matter of seconds by the Yondaime, how the demon inside Naruto's stomach explained his meat cravings. How Naruto managed the wildlife population of Konoha for a portion of each day, how he was caught by Hinata, how Naruto had never discussed this issue with anyone but her. It's evident from what you've said that this is something you've been dealing with for a while, but Hinata is right, 1 or even 2 meals a day isn't enough, and we can't let you around other academy students when there's the risk of your eating habits being spotted. Anymore, this must remain a secret. With a squeaky voice once more, Naruto exclaimed, but I want to be a ninja. Hinata placed her hand on his foot, which was the most comforting thing she could do given the situation they were in, but he didn't appear to be comforted when he looked at her. And you will be, but I will assign you a private teacher, one that can handle the Kyuubi's energy this way. There won't be any concern about exposing your secret, the Hokage said with a smile. Though it appeared to be more relief than anything else, Naruto's shoulders drooped. Naruto was released from the hospital 2 hours after he woke up, but the identity of his enigmatic teacher remained a secret. Hinata and Naruto bid farewell at the intersection that led off in the various directions the children would need to travel to get home. The girl placed a hand on Naruto-kun's shoulder and said steadily, I'll see you tomorrow, Naruto-kun, before school, like always. No, her throat tightened with breath. Why not? Naruto shook his head and said, Hinata, you saw what happened. What I did, I can't, I'm a monster. He was trembling, he was about to cry because Hinata could hear the hitch in his voice that she had only discovered today. He turned away from her and sprinted down the street to his apartment, saying, I can't be friends with you, you're too nice for me. Hinata staggered, struggling to stand on her own. Was that it? Would that be the extent of her and Naruto's acquaintance? And the fact that she was too kind was the decisive element, the thing that ultimately turned him off. She took a whiff, tried not to cry. She ran back the way they had come, past the hospital and its gardens, into the woods behind it, turning away from the spot where she could still make out the speck of his yellow hair in the distance. This was no fun running through the woods. The path was lined with brambles, jagged rocks, and twigs that sank into the soles of her old sandals. She had to walk the remainder of the way into the forest after she stumbled over a large rock once and lost her breath. It was this he had claimed: she was too kind, and he was the only person in the world who was concerned about her fate. She seemed to be too something all the time, too timid, too quiet, too awkward, too tender, not enough. Unsurprised to discover some blood, she followed her ears to a stream and soaked her feet in it to wash away the dirt. Her knees and toes were still open, but they gleamed cleanly at her, free of dust and shards of leaves. She turned over on her back, dragged a knee to her mouth, and licked the splintered flesh, salt and metal. It was just that, not a huge deal, not when Naruto was attacking animals, in particular not when Naruto was assaulting that man, in particular. She shut her eyes and inhaled the scent of water and damp dirt. Why was it so bad to be nice? All she wanted was for everyone to be safe, above all, Naruto. However, he also wanted her to be alright. Furthermore, he was most likely merely attempting to make amends after realizing how terrible he could be for her. He was too bad. Alright, thought Hinata. I am capable of being badder. After getting up and dusting off her pants, she realized that all good girls did the same thing. They purposefully left them stained because they did not get dirty. Then she started to walk away. When Naruto awoke to the sensation of another body pressing against his, he looked down to see Hinata lying on top of him in a kind of hug, her face filthy, her hair mussed, and still asleep. This, he half hoped, meant she had not heard him. Hinata. Slowly opening her eyes, she frowned at him and said, I am not too nice. He said, why are you in my room? Still holding on to him, she angrily retorted, because you said I was too nice, and that's a stupid reason not to be friends, and I'm not getting off of you until you apologize. I'm sorry, he said, looking very perplexed. Can you leave now? My arm hurts. She climbed off and stared at him as he rubbed the sensation back into his arm. Oh, okay, sorry. He returned her gaze. She murmured, I still want to be friends. I really like being your friend, Naruto. He took in, I like being your friend, too, Hinata, but I eat people. Hinata gave him a fierce look and said, I don't care, I'll be scarier. Okay, he said, gaping, okay. Yeah. After a few moments of blinking at one another, Hinata threw him back onto his bed and hugged him. He gave it back tightly, enjoying the sensation of someone being so near at the moment. He didn't really care that she smelled bad, like sweat and dirt. Hinata whispered, if I'm being mean, before her fingers touched his ribs. Naruto kicked her to stop tickling him and exclaimed, hey, that's dirty. Hinata smiled and corrected him, that's ninja, before jumping on him once more. Well, finally, you guys did it. Iruka was smiling at the class, and Hinata looked up from the hangnail she had been trying to twist off to look at him blankly. All around her, 21 16-year-olds stopped talking to look solemnly at their teacher, some of them barely suppressing a proud smile. She carefully placed the Hittite around her neck and let herself enjoy the feeling of achievement. Her position as the nearly last, second only to Shikamaru Nara, had required time and an odd amount of preparation, but she had succeeded and graduated based only on her practical results, purposefully dozing off during each paper test. Who would have guessed it took this much calculation to be the worst? Tomorrow is the last-minute retake for anyone who just needs a second try, so come the day after that for your cell assignments. Iruka replied with a grin. I'm excited to be working with you. Along with the rest of the class, she stood and bowed in gratitude before making her way as quickly as possible to the exit. A small group of family members gathered in the yard outside to congratulate the new ninja. They wouldn't contain any Hyuga. As required by the image, her grades quickly declined after she decided to surpass Naruto in being frightful and impolite. Her family's acceptance of her also went with them. She was disowned in one dramatic afternoon because of her foul language, unladylike behavior, and hanging out with Naruto. Which was really the whole point, so she could hardly stop that. She adopted Naruto's last name as a way to get even with them, which led to her being known as the Demon's Whore. Since that was precisely what she hoped would occur one day, it wasn't much of an insult. Talking of, Hinata pondered. She pounced, nearly toppling the unwary boy as her lips curled into a smile. Hello, she said into his ear, delighted to see it turn a faint pink. She could barely play the part of a harlot without looking the part. This shirt highlighted her breast size and exposed her midriff, and it also made Naruto blush whenever she gave him a hug. After a brief embrace, he removed her arms from him and stepped back, asking, You passed, then? Of course, she said with a grin. Great, I promised you cinnamon buns if you graduated, right? Or did you want something else? Cinnamon buns or, she shook her head, leaning in closer to him, you could treat me too. Cinnamon buns. Naruto snidely said, stop doing weird things, come on. He did, at least, take her hand when Hinata placed her feet in Naruto's lap. He leaned back in the candy booth and idly squeezed her ankles, though Hinata occasionally winked and licked sugar off her fingers and lip in a suggestive manner. She mostly kept the silence while she ate. Hinata held out 2 dripping fingers of frosting, and he took them in his mouth, more for her amusement than the treat. Try some. In addition to an even better sense of smell and other sensory enhancements, he had been losing interest in real, human, food since about 2 weeks ago. He was still unsure of the implications for him, and he was hesitant to discuss it with the Hokage in case they discovered something. This time when they examined the seal again, the little normalcy he was permitted didn't want to be taken away from him. Gwa. He pushed Hinata's foot away from his stomach while glaring at her. What? Listen to me. She whimpered, I haven't seen you for a week. Saying, we saw each other this morning, he resumed rubbing her ankles. That doesn't count, both of us were too tired to talk. Tell me how it went. I was with a T&I unit at a base, and they had some incooperative captives. Naruto inadvertently followed her throat as she sucked more frosting off her finger. Are you leaving again anytime soon? Dunno. With a smile, Hinata picked up her paper bowl and tossed it in the trash, then dragged him out of his seat and firmly placed her hand around his waist before letting his go to her shoulder. See if you can't latch onto my team or something, she said. I'm tired of I want to see if I can't go into assassination. He stopped and kicked a big rock out of their path. Hinata speculated that she was tired of hearing them scream. Her voice was gentle, but her hold on his waist was far more forceful than needed. He didn't respond, to be honest. That wasn't even an issue, on the contrary, he enjoyed it excessively. Hinata was staring at him and saying, Naruto, talk to me. They had been seeing each other less and less since T&I had taken over his life approximately 4 years ago. For every academy student, Hinata followed the plan, but he didn't have that luxury. He had been getting used to the gloomy, dirty surroundings of Konoha's messiest agents since he was 12 years old. They had invited him into a corner of a cell for his first encounter, covered him with a genjutsu so their captive wouldn't notice the boy, and then proceeded to slowly but surely obtain what they needed from the enemy because the higher-ups had erroneously believed that such early exposure to death and killing would have somehow dulled his morals. Biting the fingers off a rain nin for the name of a local terrorist group's leader was his first experience gathering information on his own. Ibiki, the department head, quickly came to love it. The sight of him eating and the pain he was experiencing were typically enough to make anyone lose their mind. Hinata inquired, is it classified? No? Then why won't you tell me? I feel like we never talk anymore. Since she was still so hygienic in T&I, where the smell of sweat, vomit, shit, and urine lingered through the 2-foot-thick concrete walls. Having a better sense of smell did not help. He always thought the smell of blood was delicious, but the environment always ruined it. Hinata's perfume and soap scent persisted. He slowly leaned into her and buried his face in her hair until his lips touched her ear. As a result of the reminder, his grasp on her became more firm as the aroma of flowers filled his nostrils. "Naruto?" she asked in a disappointingly firm voice. In most cases, being close would be sufficient to divert her attention if he didn't want to talk. Only once, when they were 14 and she noticed how gloomy he had been acting. Had he had to kiss her, he was simply exhausted and no longer depressed, though not into T&I. Hinata was now becoming involved in the entire situation as well, despite Ibuki's desire to obtain the ruthless and immoral Hinata Uzumaki. He had used his influence with the Hokage to keep her out of there. She shivered at his breath as he whispered, "I'm thinking," into her ear. "About?" she asked in a very clear voice. Sometimes, just like when they were children, he could make her stutter once more. Not anything in particular. They were still crammed closer together than he had ever imagined as they approached their apartment in his younger years. He had laughed off Hinata's offer of, and request for, with occasional pleading, sex. But now that she was fishing for the key among the chain, he watched as her breath caught as his hands moved from her shoulders to her bare waist and settled on her hips, pulling back until her ass met his groin. "Naruto," he whispered, "Hinata-chan, I really like this shirt." He kissed the raw skin beneath her bra by lowering it and looping a finger through the strap. Her voice was full of confidence, and he was uneasy because he couldn't tell if it was genuine or not. "You're teasing again. This isn't going to go anywhere, and you're just trying to distract me." "Hinata," he attempted, but she turned to face him after unlocking the door and entering, shaking her head. She put the key on its hook by the door and nervously looked at it rather than him. "No, I want you to get this through your thick head. I love you as a friend, and as," she said, placing the key carefully, "as more, but fine, you don't want to talk to me, fine." She kicked off her shoes and went to take a shower. Since it didn't seem like sharing a bed would be the healthiest course of action at the moment, he stared after her for a while before going to get an extra pillow and blanket for a night on the couch. The Hokage frowned and said, "Sorry, Naruto, but your addition to T&I has given us a great increase in information. We can't replace you." Naruto clenched his fists in his pockets in front of him and then nodded. "Wakari, Hokage-sama, I understand." The elderly man looked at the young man. The lively, intelligent youngster who had driven Iruka crazy with his antics was not this Naruto. The boy was now tall, serious, and appeared to be in need of a restful night's sleep. When someone from T&I had dark circles under their eyes, it was never good. The blonde started to walk away, interpreting the silence as dismissal. "Hold on," Sarutobi replied. "We can't transfer you, but I think a small break from interrogation might do you some good." "I couldn't do that," the boy said after he paused, "because I don't have enough money saved up to just take time off." "That's not quite what I was thinking. You can accompany Team 7 on their escort mission to Wave, with payment." "Isn't that Hinata's team?" "Yes," the elder ninja smiled. "I think it would help you. It would also ease some of our worries if you could take a look around while you were there." "What concerns?" the teenager asked, his eyes piercing. "The client's records are outdated. We asked for more recent ones, but he claimed they'd been lost in a fire." "Wave." Naruto scowled more deeply. "Isn't that the country with that gangster monopolizing everything?" With his pipe moved to the other side of his mouth, the Hokage said, "So it is giving us quite some trouble with getting shipments and employ over there, too." "You're sending 3 genin into that?" Naruto questioned incredulously. "He's bound to have some muscle under his employ." As he pointed with his pipe, the old man said, "You haven't met that team. They can be stubborn as mules. Team 7 is never to come in contact with any threats. It's a C-rank mission," he assured, "and they've already agreed to it." After giving the dark-haired girl some thought, Naruto sighed and said, "If the other 2 are anything like Hinata, I can imagine." "So what's the mission?" he asked, turning back to the third. The Hokage dutifully filled out the required information on the slip that would allow the Uzumaki to leave the village, saying, "Accompany and assist Team 7 on their escort and guard mission into Wave. Once there, gather information about Gato, the one behind the monopoly over industries, and if the opportunity arises, kill him." At the very least, he didn't completely lose his teammate Sasuke. Fortunately, resident dead last Hinata Uzumaki went above and beyond to ensure he knew she wasn't one of his fangirls, despite her pushiness and mean streak. To his knowledge, she had also performed fairly well on practicals. The only reason her grades were so low was because she had slept through all of her paper tests and kicked the proctor when he pressed her about it. Since Shikamaru Nara had barely passed both his paper tests and practicals, he had really expected him to be the last member of their team. However, he was placed in the same cell as Ino, so there was no envy there. Sakura Haruno, however, twirled a lock of sugar floss-colored hair around a finger and batted her eyes. Sasuke-kun, how about once we get to wave, we go on a date? Where the hell's our sensei? Uzumaki yelled from her seat, her arms and legs crossed testily. Sakura growled back at her, how am I supposed to know? Why don't you look for him, white eyes? Uzumaki appeared to think about this for a moment before standing up, activating her bloodline, and staring straight ahead for a few moments before releasing her hand sign and continuing to look forward with a blank face. Well? Sakura blinked. Distractedly, she said, Sensei's nowhere nearby, then unzipped her shirt to reveal her typical amount of cleavage and combed her bangs. Sasuke purposefully avoided looking so that neither of them would notice and start to argue, as they usually did. He turned back to the road after hearing footsteps and saw a blonde Chunin jogging toward them, shifting from side to side and looking from the ground to the blonde to somewhere behind him. Hinata appeared agitated. So he said, hello. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm meant to accompany you on your mission. I thought I'd be a bit early, but you're here, so I must be late, nay? Sasuke asked, what time were you supposed to show up? 9. Why? The ninja blinked as the genin before him displayed a variety of angry expressions. Your sensei doesn't happen to be. Ah, Naruto-kun. There you are, exclaimed Kakashi Hitaki as he walked up to the client. The blonde sighed. Yep, hey, Kakashi still doing this, was more of a sigh than a question. Baka-sensei. We've been here since 6:45. Hinata yelled, gesturing toward the Junin with a dark fingernail. Well, you see, a bat got into my house, and I was afraid of catching rabies, so I had to exit and wait for the authorities to get rid of it, Kakashi joked. Sakura muttered, you are the authorities, with a growl. As he introduced himself, Tazuna cautiously shook the blonde shinobi's hand and scratched his scalp under his hat behind Kakashi. Sakura said, say, Uzumaki-san, are you and Hinata related? No, was the response from both Hinata and Naruto. Then why do you two have the same last name? The ninja with the whiskers said, it's, not my story to tell, Haruno-san, and went on to walk quietly. She had to hum in agreement when the old man asked, is it me? Or is there some tension between the blonde and Miss Gloom and Doom? Since their departure, Hinata had maintained her lead over the group, not only by remaining silent, something Sakura had believed was impossible for the obsessive talker, but also by walking with a sway to her hips that she knew was hard to do for more than a block. It was impressive that she had maintained it for this long. Sakura caught a whiff of a crush. Each of them was sweating a little under their gear because the sun had just risen. The dark-haired Uzumaki took advantage of this by taking off her jacket from under her pack and tying it around her waist. This didn't reveal any skin, but it did highlight the curve of her hips with the clingy top she had worn underneath. Early bloomers are dumb. Sasuke said, Sensei, with urgency. I know, Kakashi said with a smile, but this is a training exercise. Just give it a minute and let's see if anyone else catches on. Before noticing the puddle the other girl was going to step over, Sakura searched the area for whatever it was she was meant to concentrate on. Hina. There were only fragments where Hinata had been. A voice said, one down, and there was the sound of chains clinking. Sakura experienced a horrible sensation that she dimly understood to be murderous intent, but it was soon overtaken by the same feeling, only heavier and more irate. That came from Naruto Uzumaki's growling. A clawed hand reached out to grab one of the attacker's throats before anyone could move, then pulled and sprayed gore all over the attacker, Uzumaki, and other objects. 2 strong beats of silence preceded Kakashi's statement. Well, that was dramatic. Sakura blinked and turned to see Sasuke and Hinata standing over the second enemy's bound form, the white-eyed girl idly observing the blonde's relieved expression where she had previously believed Hinata's remains to be. There were pieces of wood. She shouted at the other girl, idiot, don't scare us like that, but the other girl didn't even bat an eye. Hinata nodded when the Chunin asked, you're okay? In a voice that was even more worn out than usual. Brother. The shackled ninja called, his eyes welling with tears as he saw his partner's hunched form. Damn it, you'll pay for that. As he glared at the man who had fallen, the blue-eyed male replied icily, I don't think I will, removing his vest and dropping it in a small patch of clean grass. Kakashi, this is my area of expertise. You go on, I'll catch up. With a nod, Sensei signaled for everyone to proceed, carefully stepping over the accumulating blood close to the body of the attacker of Hinata. The said girl didn't follow. Sensei, I'd like to stay and observe. No, you wouldn't. Uzumaki met her gaze with a steady gaze. You don't have the authority to order me around. Pointing to the item of clothing on his left, Naruto said, actually, I do. That's what this vest means. You're going on with your team. That decision would be mine to make, seeing as I'm her sensei and the leader of this mission, Kakashi said with a smile. Hinata can stay and observe the interrogation hopefully. You can work out whatever issues the two of you have, the rest, come with me. It was her. Sakura cautiously made her way around the smeared areas of the ground behind the client, relieved to be out of the way of the two Uzumaki who were staring at one another with enough intensity to set something on fire. I'm not giving away shit. Without trying to prevent the boniest part of his knuckle from digging into the soft hollow in the skull and likely causing serious damage to the ocular organ, Naruto punched the nin in the eye and then stomped on his shin for good measure. Shut the fuck up. You'll talk when I tell you to. When Hinata held out a handkerchief to him, he arched his brows. You've got blood all over you. Chances are that's not going to improve in the next hour or so, he said. He pointed to his blood-stained vest and said, if you want to watch, sit over there. She complied, hovering for a moment before taking a seat. He yelled at the missing nin, K, attention off the pretty girl and on me. With a clear desire for blood he loomed closer, and the ninja winced. I can smell your fear. You can tell I'm not human, can't you? Then what the hell are you? When the subject cried out, Naruto smiled and pressed a handful of evil chakra to the ninja's face, covering the closing eye and licking his lips. Strike two, he said. They hadn't even done anything particularly interesting yet, and already he could taste the man's pain and fear. The missing nin hacked out a glob of red-tinted saliva and said, I have been through worse. I don't doubt that, Naruto said with a smile in return. So we won't be playing that game today. This one's easier. You want to kill me. I want to be fair and give you the chance, so you choose between your life and giving me information about your employer. You pick the second one. You live to fight another day. You don't, I'll just kill you here. He might have done worse, but Hinata was present. Even though it would have been easier to explain everything to her through this demonstration, he didn't want to cause her any more trauma than she already would. Why would I make a deal with the person who killed my brother? Naruto gently remarked, it's not so much a deal as a survival attempt on your part. Removing the ninja's gauntlet to reveal a pale hand that trembled in the wind, then, grinning at the man once more, he bit down, his long teeth effortlessly ripping through bone and flesh, and the sound was echoed by an alarmed scream. Even as the ichor trickled down his chin and onto his shirt, Naruto smiled and purposefully licked it from his lips as usual. He had chosen black for today in T&I. White quickly became outdated. WHWH. He licked his teeth and said, take your time, it's an important decision. Would you want to know? Naruto grinned. Blood loss ultimately prevailed over common sense, and Naruto sealed the remains of both opponents into a scroll before reluctantly accepting his vest from Hinata and hosed off with a clone's jutsu. They started running after Kakashi's group without saying anything until Naruto finally asked. Well, you really think I'm pretty? Naruto blinked and tried to come up with a reply, but the laugh that was building in his throat was the first thing that came out. Hinata joined him and said soberly, Naruto, I told you I didn't care, didn't I? Slowly, he said, it's different than it was before. It's not really about food, now it's about hurting people, scaring them. He was also concerned about the potential dangers of the pleasure he got from doing those things. Hinata asked, that's our job, though, isn't it? We're ninja, we're all about hurting and scaring. Naruto gave a wry smile. I used to think we were heroes, you know? We are, Hinata replied. To the village, to each other. You need anything else? Hair fanned out behind her as the wind pushed it back, but she kept her eyes on the path ahead. Her eyes were bright and her mouth curled into a smile. Despite the fact that her pale jacket was covered in blood and that she had a small cut on her cheek from the previous skirmish slowing down, he grabbed her arm and forced her to turn to him, causing her eyebrows to furrow slightly above her nose. His lips were pressed firmly together to keep her from gagging at the taste of the raw flesh. As he pressed his mouth to hers, she was motionless as he withdrew, gazing at him as if she didn't think he was there. No, I really don't. Kakashi was likely worried by Hinata's unusual silence as the group secretly drifted to Tazuna's destination, but she wasn't particularly worried about that at the moment. She now realized that Naruto had only ever kissed her once, and that was only to divert her attention. She had to try to push her feelings for him back, because most of his displays of affection were meant to make her forget what she was talking about or drop the topic. He usually got away with using touches and cuddles to end any conversations he didn't want to be a part of, because it never really worked. However, this time, touching her lips, she glanced at the spiky tangle of blonde hair spinning in front of her while the demon container took in the hazy landscape. It was different this time. No interruptions, no deceit, no abrupt departure from the situation. The kiss was genuine. It was simply incredible. Not the actual kiss, that is, it had been a genuine kiss, but Naruto's breath smelled of blood, and he had kept his hands on her shoulders, more like a teacher adjusting posture than a boyfriend that was somewhat romantic, as he had intended. When he saw her staring, the object of her affection turned and smiled slightly, causing her to blush and quickly turn away, covering her neck to prevent him from seeing it spread to her chest in addition to burning easily in the sun. Being pale has the drawback of being a clear emotional indicator. She would have been in serious trouble for all the arguments she had with Sakura if she hadn't blushed when she was truly angry rather than when she was just annoyed. Naruto questioned, "How much longer?" She wasn't sure if she should be happy that he seemed so animated when he spoke to people or concerned that he might feel the need to hide something. He always sounded worn out when they were alone by this point. It was more of a gauge of his comfort level than his energy level anymore. She took pride in the fact that she was the only person whose voice even remotely sounded worn out. Everyone else was given a peppy mask, but nobody ever seemed to look closely enough to see the circles under his eyes or the way his jaw muscle jumped when someone really pushed it. 15 minutes, said the man who had been navigating silently. Naruto said brightly to the pinkette sitting next to him, "Take my seat, Sakura-san. You get a better view, well, as good as you can, in this fog," before carefully getting up and backing away in the small boat, landing in front of Hinata and leaning so his back was against her shins. To deter rumors, Naruto tended to only touch her when they were alone or with strangers, in addition to primarily using it as a distraction. That he was doing it in front of her sensei and teammates, given that he had looped one arm through the gap between her calf and the seat and was now clutching her knee possessively. She immediately turned back to the water and went back to covering her neck with her hand in an attempt to take a deep breath and calm the intense flush that had begun to rise. That would be possessive, wouldn't it? Over her, Naruto was acting possessively. Kakashi asked cheerfully, "Hinata, your heartbeat's almost doubled, are you alright?" Everyone in the boat looked at her, with the exception of Kakashi, who turned blissfully away from her death glare. Sakura smirked at her, and she thought, "I'll get you for that, Cyclops-sensei." She tried to cool her cheeks by pressing a hand she had dipped in the river to her face. Gods. She detested how easily she blushed. Even after everyone had turned away, Naruto continued to stare at her, his hair tickling her knees through her pants and his head lightly bumping against her as the boat rocked. It was safe to turn back to him after he finally looked forward, but he turned to face her and grinned broadly when he saw her flushed cheeks. She covered his eyes with her hands to perhaps convey that he was bothering her, but he pulled her hands down and pressed his lips to her palms in a kiss-like gesture, his weary eyes glinting playfully at her through her blonde hair the whole time, putting her in an even more precarious position. Though she suspected Kakashi knew more about what was happening than his perverted giggles revealed, she looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Fortunately, everyone was more interested in their surroundings. Did Naruto continue to gaze at her? Indeed, geez, why didn't he take a moment to look elsewhere? Looking at her from that perspective was, in fact, the least flattering one conceivable. He would notice a double chin if she looked down, but worse, if she didn't, he would be able to see up her nose. She shifted her attention from him to the hazy surroundings. Bending slightly in the hopes of seeing her reflection in the water, she could only see a portion of her nose and bangs, so it wasn't good. After paying the man who had helped them cross the water, they soon found themselves on the sandy shores of the island where Tezuna's village was located. Naruto walked naively beside her, as though he hadn't been staring at her for the past 15 minutes or so and laughing whenever she blushed. That was pretty much the final happy moment before things went south. Since the Hokage had warned him that he was leading his team into a danger zone, and that Naruto was accompanying more because he had his own mission in the same area than anything else, Kakashi was able to piece together the essentials of what was happening. He hadn't given much thought to continuing until the Demon Brothers' attack. It was a mission, and even though it was riskier than most, these genin had 4 more years to train than rookies from other nations, and more than twice as much if you were comparing them to graduates from the war. In addition, they had the backing of a Jinchuriki. It was surprising how Naruto reacted and how little he performed in the boat. He wouldn't have assumed Hinata was the kind to be teased easily or that the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki were the kind to go teasing girls, but whatever, the blonde Uzumaki pretended to be observing his surroundings, but the way he favored the side she was on revealed that he was more interested in her than the trees now. The two of them were strolling side by side like embarrassed lovers. At least, the Kunoichi was. He was alerted to the emergence of murderous intent by the Uchiha's piercing gaze. Up, again. Kakashi chastised himself for becoming careless in his old age. He should have figured out the puddle trick much earlier than the 16-year-old, not just around the same time. Although it was helpful to not be so intimidated by it in combat, the drawback was that it was nearly impossible to detect unless it truly threatened his ability to perform his duties. As it was, he had a tendency to ignore it, which had recently cost him multiple missions. Fortunately, he had 3 new genin to help him with the spotting. Softly, Kakashi said, "Hinata, look around." She complied, pausing while wearing a puzzled look. Her eyes grew wide as she said, "I can't." The blonde shouted, "Get down!" and dragged Sasuke and Hinata, who were the closest members of the group, down with him. Long after Kakashi and Naruto had risen and assumed their battle stances, the genin and Tazuna gazed around in a daze, their gazes finally settling on a massive cleaver protruding from a tree. Snarling from the haze, "Give up the old man, Hitaki, and the kids keep their lives." A moment later, a grizzled shinobi with half of his face wrapped in bandages occupied the empty space above the embedded blade. "Momochi Zabuza," came Naruto's voice, demon of the bloody mist wanted in the bingo book for deserting Mist, and known to be the reason for the murder of nearly 100 children during one of the darkest times in Mist's history. "Give the kid a cookie," the ninja whispered, folding his arms across his chest. "You done reciting my resume? Give me the old man, I have a job to do." With his hand on his hip, Kakashi remarked, "So do we, it's to get him home safely. What happened to the two who were supposed to stop you first?" They met their sticky end. Naruto waved a scroll at eye level. Kakashi saw that the blonde's pupils had dilated, and was momentarily concerned that he was relishing in the idea of killing before realizing that, idiot, adrenaline also did that. "Ah, did you do the job? You seem like the type." Naruto nodded his head toward Tazuna and said, "Don't flatter me, but tell me, how much is Gato promising you to finish him off? And what are you threatening him with to make sure you get your cash?" The nin's eyes narrowed to resemble a smile. "I keep my business dealings private, brat say," the nin said. "Aren't you Uzumaki? I've heard about you, you're just as bloodthirsty as me, but in the literal sense, am I right?" Naruto crossed his arms and asked, "What have you heard?" "Just the insane stuff. Some bastard escaped from Konoha's tea and a few years ago they hunted him down, but not before he spilled the beans on Konoha's top interrogator." Zabuza's brow furrowed. "The cannibal." With a shrug, Naruto said, "The guy needs to eat." "I think I like you, tease a shame," Zabuza exclaimed with a great laugh. "So you won't let us pass? What do you think?" His genin prepared their weapons and assumed battle stances. Kakashi opened one red eye and straightened his hite. With a slight roll of his shoulder, Zabuza leapt from his perch atop the giant cleaver and yanked it out of the tree. He then leapt over Sasuke and Naruto, who were in the first line of defense, and went directly to where Sakura and Hinata had positioned themselves side by side to protect Tazuna. Sakura was the unfortunate ninja who was thrown bodily from the old man after the girls reacted swiftly and aimed strikes at the missing nin's knee and shoulder, or so they believed, but in reality, they only struck an afterimage. Tazuna was sprayed with pearls of red, and he licked the droplets from his cheek before vanishing in a cloud of smoke, revealing a smirking blonde. Sasuke looped ninja wire around the prone man while he was distracted, and the cannibal grabbed the enemy ninja's sword hilt and used Zabuza's natural pull away to deliver a double kick to his breastbone. The Uchiha sent a stream of flames down the wire before waiting for Naruto to clear, presumably because he knew Naruto could make the jump that quickly from his automatic swap with the bridge builder, and not because he actually didn't care. The water splash that resulted struck the ninjas' faces with force. "Very good," Zabuza crooned through his face's bandages. "Mizu Bunshin," spit out Naruto, mirroring the blonde's frown. Sasuke slicked his now drenched bangs away from his forehead. The real Tazuna and Hinata gathered around Sakura's bleeding form across the small clearing where the battle was taking place. The dark-haired Kunoichi broke open her dress in spite of protests and started pressing her own jacket against the large gash that, as Naruto could see, ran from the girl's collarbone between her breasts to the lower ribs on her opposite side. He had thought she was the kind of person who valued appearances. That scar would haunt her. "What sort of ninja takes on children?" taunted Kakashi's image, while the original dealt Zabuza 2 quick blows to the side before he had to avoid a lethal sword swing. "Children? Konoha brats graduate at 16, don't they?" Zabuza responded. 4 extra years. We didn't have that luxury. Would have thought you'd agree, Kakashi." Sasuke questioned. "What's he talking about? After the war, Konoha was the strongest village, and everyone else was struggling to recover. We had the resources to train our ninja until 16. But other villages needed them to enter the force at 12 at latest to hurry up and take missions for funding," said Naruto. "There are Chunin out there younger than us?" The dark-haired boy seemed almost repulsed by the prospect. "Yes, a few, in between all the dead and insane ones." Naruto was quick to respond. Sending kids out to kill before puberty doesn't do anything good for development. Naruto had known this from experience. With red eyes glaring out at the missing nin, Kakashi declared, "We're not here to argue the pros and cons of Konoha's educational system." Sasuke appeared to have seen a ghost. Zabuza said, "I thought that was it," as he slung his sword over his shoulder. "Sharingan no Kakashi, honored to be worthy enough to see it." Kakashi said evenly, All foes fall before this eye, and jumped to stop the nin before he could return to Tazuna. Zabuza kicked Kakashi back and snarled, all but one, as he pointed to a stream that was off to the side of the clearing with a deliberate splash, if it could be called that. The silver-haired Junin landed in the water, signaling his intention to regroup below the surface. Naruto muttered under his breath, that was a bad move. Zabuza has a water affinity. As it turned out, Kakashi was imprisoned in a water prison in a matter of seconds. Great. Any ideas? Said Sasuke using a hand gesture. Naruto created a group of clones, 4 of which charged at the enemy while yelling obscenities. We need to snap his control. Sasuke refrained from popping all the blondes in his vicinity, which proved to be a wise decision because the Chunin whispered a scheme to the black-eyed teen as soon as Zabuza's focus was diverted from the other boys. As a shuriken the size of a bicycle tire flew at him from the direction of the Uchiha, the missing nin snarled, "You brats are really testing my patience," and dodged. From behind the swordsman, Naruto grinned and said, "You really should work on that," then, while holding onto the twin of the weapon Sasuke had just thrown. What? The weapon struck from a much closer distance this time, forcing the man to release the jutsu and pull his arm away from the water sphere surrounding Kakashi unless he wanted it severed. Kakashi whispered, "Nicely done," as he shook his hair. "I'm not finished yet, Kakashi," said Zabuza, "don't forget, we're still in my element." Mirroring the bandaged nin's hand signs as they emerged, the Junin sneered, "How can I, with you chattering about it like a monkey?" With a mad smile, Zabuza retorted, "In this game, it's the fastest who wins. Your skills aren't." Kakashi didn't hold off until he was done. Water style, giant waterfall. An enormous wave rose up, soaking everything nearby, uprooting small shrubs, bending trees backwards, and popping a good number of Naruto's clones. More significantly, though, it threw their enemy into a tree hard enough to likely break a few bones. Naruto blinked and asked, "Was that Zabuza's technique?" "The Sharingan can copy any technique perfectly," said Sasuke, "and if the user is skilled enough, it can predict movements." So Kakashi predicted the final hand signs and chakra release. That Zabuza had little time to comprehend the Sharingan's power, though, as 2 long senbon pierced his neck less than 2 seconds later. Naruto's gaze followed them until it settled on a masked person perched atop a nearby tree. "Hunter Nin?" The mask gave a nod. The stranger grabbed the unconscious Zabuza before anyone could speak, then body flitted off. They heard a moan, and Naruto had to dash over to save Kakashi from drowning in the knee-deep pool of water. He had been standing in a rather pitiful demise for a ninja who just let loose a watery hell on everyone around him. The sand they had been standing in had turned to mud, and everyone was soaked. "Sasuke, take Kakashi. He's chakra exhausted, so his body's trying to refuel with sleep right now. Keep some energy bars in your pocket to give to him when he wakes up." Naruto watched the teenager lift the older nin onto his backside. "You look a little pale, so eat one, to keep your blood sugar steady." "How is she?" he asked as he approached the small group gathered around Sakura. "Loopy and cold," Hinata answered. Tazuna went on to say, "Her pulse is super weak. Lungs? Working fine. Bones are all intact, too well." Hinata took a breath. "Her chest expands correctly. Maybe a few are scratched, though." "All right, let's get her out of here." 2 more people carefully lifted the pinkette onto the remaining clone, which was now a working stretcher. "You too, eat one of these," Naruto said, throwing 2 energy bars to the elderly man and Hinata. Naruto glanced back at the girl on the cot, who was muttering to herself in a daze as they complied. He carefully removed the inert man from the pale boy and said, "On second thought, Sasuke, give me Kakashi." You walk next to Sakura. Hold her hand. Keep her talking. Don't complain. This is about making sure she lives. Just keep her awake. With Sasuke awkwardly holding Sakura's clammy hand and listening to her recite the shinobi rules for him, the group started to move forward, with Tazuna and Hinata walking slowly to make room for the others. When everyone had mostly calmed down, Naruto withdrew to a secluded area of the dock that surrounded Tazuna's home to extract a limb from his sealing scroll and reflect on the day's events. While gnawing on missed nin flesh, he would be eating the meat for the next week or so, but it tasted strange and boring, possibly from poor diet or drug use. As soon as Kakashi recovered enough to lead his team, he left the house and went to wherever Gato kept his important papers and other belongings. Stealing was also on his agenda because he suspected the mobster had acquired some items that Konoha might find useful to keep his kills fresh. He usually carried sealing scrolls with him, but they would also work for everyday objects. He resealed the fare into the scroll and went back inside after licking the stain off his hands. His pants were already ruined, of course, but that was no excuse to make them even dirtier. He wanted to put the item back in his vest and then most likely take a shower, perhaps ask Tazuna if he has a washer he could use. To his surprise, he discovered Sasuke Uchiha holding a bowl of partially cooked rice and vegetables while observing the unconscious Hitaki. "He doing alright? He's been my teacher for almost a month. He never once mentioned the Sharingan." Naruto searched his mind for his sporadic knowledge of Konoha's past. He knew it was Hitaki's bastard sensei had been his pupil, and every reference to Kakashi included commendation for the man's valor. Naruto had heard the tale of how he acquired his unique eye numerous times, despite his discomfort at hearing other people's secrets. That's, his business, you know." Sasuke gave him a mean look and said, "It's my right to know. The Sharingan belongs to the Uchiha." "That Sharingan belongs to Kakashi Hitaki," he said, gesturing to the unconscious Junin. "How did he get it?" Naruto softened at the boy's gloomy face. "He didn't steal it if that's what you're asking, but, seriously, not gonna go handing out other people's histories for your peace of mind. Look, every ninja has crap that they deal with: grudges, relationship, self-loathing. There's no one in the world who knows it better than ninja. You gotta let people share when they're ready." Sasuke said nothing, sighing. "If you're really curious, you can look at old mission reports, but don't go dragging people into the past for your own convenience. That messes people up." "You work at TNI, don't you?" "Yeah. Why? You don't look much older than me." "I'm not. I'm 16. There were issues with me being in the academy, so they set me up with an individual teacher. I graduated at 12. Like other Suna's ninja, then I went to TNI." "Did you choose to go?" "No." Sasuke frowned as he looked at him. Naruto could only speculate as to what he saw. "Why did they send you there?" "A slack, sleep-deprived teen with an overly raspy voice who seems to have a great deal of sympathy for those with depressing pasts." Shrugging, he said, "Needed people. You were 12. Putting a hand through his hair, the cannibal said, "It's not I have a talent for scaring people. That's as far as we're gonna go into it. Hinata knows, doesn't she? Your secret, whatever it is." "Yeah." Kakashi opened one eye and stirred. "Naruto. Hey, Hitaki, I'll go get you some grub." The ninja with silver hair turned to face his pupil. "Sasuke, did you need something?" Naruto waited for the boy's response while standing by the door. "No, sir." Sasuke looked at him measuringly in the hall. "Go take a shower. I'll get him some food." "Remember what I said." "I will." The boy gave him a look that was a mix of curiosity and annoyance before heading toward the kitchen. "Hey." Looking up from the water, Hinata saw a mostly soaked Naruto with a towel around his neck, carrying a mug of what appeared to be chamomile tea toward her. She had taken a shower first, and she was now dipping her toes in the chilly water while air-drying her hair on the dock that encircled Tazuna's house. While drinking her tea, she inquired, "Status?" He took a seat beside her. "Sasuke's taking a shower. Tsunami got some soup in Sakura, and she's sleeping now." Kakashi woke up, ate 2 energy bars, a bowl of soup, 2 bowls of rice, a plate of pickled vegetables and fish, then went back to sleep. "Have you eaten?" "Yeah, before I showered you." She took another sip of her tea and said, With a sigh, Naruto lay back on the dock, closing his eyes and placing his hands behind his head. Hinata said, "Today was intense," putting down the mug to gaze at him. Hinata's gaze dropped. Naruto reassured her, saying, "You did fine, better than fine. You saved Sakura's life." Pulling her feet out of the water and putting her arms around her legs, she admitted, "It's like you and Sasuke were in a whole other league. Sakura and I couldn't do anything." "You'll get better. We have a week before anything with Zabuza happens again." "I thought the Hunter Nin." "That wasn't a Hunter Nin. The Senbon." Hinata turned to see Sasuke approaching them while wearing a solid pair of navy pajamas. "Those can be used to invoke a death-like trance, can't they?" Hinata wanted to punch something, so she blinked and asked, "So that was Zabuza's ally? Are you kidding me?" "Afraid not." Naruto shrugged. "We'll see both of them again, but it'll take a while before Zabuza recovers from the needles. A week, maybe a week and a half." With decisiveness, Sasuke stated, "So we train." Naruto told the boy, who was lying on the dock, "Well, right now you need to rest and eat something. Don't stay up too late and check for any weird soreness before you go to sleep. You, too, Hinata-chan. Good night." After saying, "Night," both Uzumaki responded to the Uchiha, who returned inside. Naruto turned languidly to smile at Hinata as she lay back onto the wooden planks. "You know, you're pretty zen for someone who went through what we did today." He sighed, "Everyone's alive and you're safe. Don't want to worry about too much right now." When he pulled her to him until they were close enough to embrace, she leaned forward and touched his lips, feeling her heartbeat quicken when his hand cupped her hip. She felt a surge of excitement as she raised her fingers to touch his wet hair when he got up and moved so that he was hovering over her, giving her cheeks, eyes, and mouth small, playful kisses. The sound of the water gently lapping against the dock was enough to drown out her faint gasp. Surprised at how wet it got when two mouths remained open against each other, she tightened her grip on his hair and pulled him down for a deeper kiss. Before retreating, Naruto's tongue tickled the roof of her mouth and moved in slow circles over her teeth, blending with hers in order to reinforce the motion. Hinata swiftly leaned forward and bit his lower lip. Drawing him back over her, she did this by putting her arms around his neck and putting one leg through the opening created when he had gotten up, so that he was partially leaning on her and their hip bones bumped against one another whenever one of them moved. "Wait, Hinata. Don't wanna," she whispered back, thrilled by the sensation of his flank against hers and the recent realization that she could feel his ribs expand as he breathed if she kept her hand against his side before he could object. She kissed him once more. She delivered a double-edged attack, putting her legs around his waist and running her fingers through his scalp. She couldn't help but smile when she felt something hard start to press against her pajama shorts. The fact that sex education classes coincided with seduction was another factor that contributed to Konoha's students remaining in the academy for longer than others. Ninja who understood the functions and weaknesses of each body part were produced after weeks of extremely uncomfortable lessons, class discussions, and tests. Naruto is foolish for not being ready for this. "Now, that's not fair," she said sharply. "What are you gonna do about it?" He purred back, "Punish you," before viciously tickling her ribs. Hey. She tried to kick him off her, but it was difficult because of the way she had positioned them, particularly since he had made the decision to simply collapse on top of her, allowing gravity to hold her in place. "No fair." Naruto smiled and got to his knees, allowing her to relax from her hunched-up position. "Oh, not fair. My apologies," he said, lifting her shirt and blowing a raspberry on her bare stomach. When he smiled at her from his spot against the house wall, Hinata screamed and finally kicked him away, curling into a fetal position and fighting the urge to smile back. They heard footsteps and saw Sasuke coming back, glaring at them both and saying, "You're being noisy." After apologizing, Naruto turned to Hinata and said, "Come on, it's time to go to bed anyhow." He extended a hand to her, which she accepted, but he was yanked away toward the water and out of view. Sasuke pondered. There wasn't a splash. Hinata crept forward, keeping her belly to the dock in case Naruto tried to drag her, and she laughed when she saw him lying idly on his back in the water, likely using chakra to suspend himself because she couldn't see any signs of moisture on his clothing. "Yo, get your ass up here. Dunno if that's a good idea. You and Sasuke are both up there together. You might kill me." After scoffing, said Uchiha returned inside. The blonde just grinned back at her as she narrowed her eyes. He spread his hands wide in a gesture of innocence and said, "How about this? We both get out of this dry, and go inside and cuddle." She dropped to her knees and reached out to him, saying, "Sounds good," pulling her into the water. Naruto grabbed her outstretched hand and braced himself against the semi-solid liquid. When breakfast time arrived, Sakura was awake and able to move independently, albeit cautiously since she still bled if she got up or turned to look at something too quickly. Everyone kind of minded their own business about what she did. She ate a smaller meal and assumed that Kakashi, who had been encouraging her to eat more, would have commented normally. She certainly wasn't pleased about it, given that the entire time was spent with her talking and flitting in and out of consciousness, leaving her unsure of whether half of it was real. Any idiot could see that the drawbacks outweighed the time Sasuke had spent holding her hand. She was positive that at some point she had admitted to being afraid he would think she was ugly due to the scar. Perhaps she hadn't even mentioned it to Sasuke. Hinata had mentioned it while assisting her with her bath, mentioning that Sasuke enjoyed serious ninja and that kunoichi and scars went hand in hand like cream and strawberries. She was grumpy above all else on a field trip. She felt like the child who had to take a break. Aside from that, the timeout included the inability to shower or get out of bed without assistance. The more she observed, the more it appeared that everyone was genuinely enjoying themselves. While Kakashi calmly absorbed the atmosphere with a smile on his face while reading his dirty book, Tazuna and his daughter were making jokes about household matters, and Naruto and Hinata had started a charade in which he flirted lightly and she pretended to be upset with him over something that happened last night, having been able to put himself to the test against a genuine foe. Even Sasuke appeared content with how things had turned out. Then there was that little brat of Tsunami's who liked to tell them that nothing could change and that they were all going to die. She was getting really annoyed about it. The dark-haired woman leaned over the table, her face worried. "Naruto-kun, are you sure you don't want anything?" she asked. "Nah, thanks, I'm on a weird diet," he responded, "for my health." Kakashi questioned the Chunin, "Will you be staying with us or moving on?" "Huh? I'm not here as part of your team, remember? I have my own mission, Naruto said, waving away Hinata's worried expression. What is it? He made a shushing motion and said, top secret, I'm leaving after breakfast, should be back sometime in the middle of the week. Sakura was even more irritated because Hinata was now her companion or had to cope with being alone, while Hinata proceeded to engage in combat with Sasuke-kun. It would have been better if Sakura could have gotten up to shut the damn thing before the Uzumaki couple decided to make out outside her window. After breakfast, the blonde left with a final slip of the tongue after reminding each other to be careful in between kisses and Hinata's various expressions of gratitude. Worst of all, Hinata described in great detail what it felt like to kiss Chunin Uzumaki, but instead of blushing or denying anything, she smiled and gave her obscene smirks. However, she now had someone to turn to who actually had experience. Sakura tried to visualize the blonde's sucking face as she asked, was it firm or gentle? He was too courteous, so it didn't work out. I'm remembering it being more slippery. To be honest, you have to keep swallowing, you know? There's a lot of spit in there. I know, shivered Sakura. Additional classes covering topics like poisons, emergency wound dressing, and the usefulness of lip locking were taught. I got paired with Ishida at cram school. Surprised you could bear kissing anyone but your precious Sasuke-kun, said Hinata, wrinkled her nose. Teacher said that if we took the class, we had to commit, including the weird lessons. Sakura exhaled. At least I know what to do, now. Stop that. Sakura noticed that she had been scratching beneath her bandages when she looked down. Anyway, you never took the class, did you? She shrugged. Didn't wanna. First of all, no way I'm kissing anyone other than Naruto, Hinata replied sternly. Second, they're just extra stuff you'd end up learning as you went, anyway. Sakura arched an eyebrow and asked, like you learned to dress my wound on the battlefield yesterday? I get that you hate school, but seriously, it's my life we're talking about. Crack open a textbook. Hinata winced. Sorry. Apologizing really doesn't suit you. If we're gonna go there, the cutesy girl image really doesn't suit you. Sakura fought the urge to sit up and said, excuse me? Her wrappings would be messed up by that. Look, I know you learned how to girl from Ino, and that's fine, but it's not really your style. This is getting touchy-feely, Hinata. Sakura arched an eyebrow. Hinata grinned and said, see, you can be sarcastic, too. Some guys find that sexy. Weird guys. Sorry, forgot you like Sasuke Uchiha. Totally normal guy right there. You know what? Shut up, the pinkette said, leaning back and closing her eyes. Leave the cripple to rest in peace and quiet. I'm just saying Ino's got the cutesy girl thing down pretty good. If you're gonna go after Sasuke, maybe some variety would help. Sakura merely gazed incomprehensibly. Be yourself. Myself scares the shit out of boys. With her face buried in her hands, Hinata said, gods, it's like talking to a 5-year-old. Sakura threw a pillow at Hinata after waiting until she was no longer protected by her fists. Keep out of my business, white eyes. I'm just saying. Sakura frowned and said, well, I didn't ask you to stay out of my life. Hinata folded her hands across her chest and pursed her lips. Fine. She stood up and walked away. When Sakura attempted to recline against her bed once more, she realized that it was now across the room and that it was her only pillow. She thought about sagging against her headboard in defiance, but decided that would only make her injury worse. She had no choice but to shimmy under her sheets and sleep. Sasuke thought Hinata would be reading during their break from sparring, but she wasn't. Perhaps napping, to be honest. That was the most he had ever seen the Uzumaki read. The book she was holding was not very impressive. It was more akin to a handbook, and from what he could see, the passages were bullet-pointed. He had doubted her ability to read at all. Her eyes were still on the page for a few seconds as she mouthed what she was reading before turning to face him and blinking milky-colored eyes. What's up, Sasuke? She asked. Chunin Uzumaki's secret, you know it. Her mouth formed a line, her eyes narrowed, and her face instantly shut off. Yes, why? He remained silent as he tried to understand why he was so curious about himself. She relaxed a little and shook her bangs out of her eyes before saying, just curious. That's Naruto's business, you know? Taking another look at her, he said, you two know each other. Yeah, he's probably the only person I do anything for. Not really wanting to get any closer, he sat down against a nearby tree. Setting her book aside, Hinata drew her knees up to her chin and grinned slightly as she looked at him. We were friends when we were little. Something happened, his secret got out, and we decided to stay friends. Sasuke recalled, you were very quiet for the first few years in the academy. She replied, that changed after we met. The Hyuga didn't like my new attitude, and they disowned me. Naruto took me in. He didn't want to say, people in Konoha call you When he looked into Hinata's eyes, he saw a challenging smirk on her face as her mouth worked around the words, "the demon's whore," as if she enjoyed saying them. As he waited for the others, Sasuke remained silent and said, "Naruto hates it when we were kids. He tried to break up our friendship because of how the villagers treated him. Didn't want the same thing to happen to me. I'm proud to be called that. I think, if there was one thing I'd like my life to be about, it'd be about staying with him." "Why do they call him that?" She sounded irate. "I already said, if he wants to tell you, he will," she said. "Why are you so determined to find out, anyway?" The Uchiha thought about simply leaving, but then he remembered her nickname and said, "In spite of himself, he's our age and he's been a chunin for 4 years. He's already part of a department. I need to know how he got ahead of us." Her milky purple eyes, which had lost their typical gleam, stared at him for much longer than he thought. He needed an answer before simply pursing her lips and returning to her reading. Sasuke remained silent as well, leaning back against his tree to rest for a short while before Kakashi discovered them and ended their break. The forest echoed with the sound of a slap, and then a much quieter curse. After examining the bloody smear on his palm, Naruto concluded that he did, in fact, hate wave. Even though the night had been cool, the humidity that came with sunrise brought with it thirst, perspiration, and general discomfort. Hinata's typical outfit of shorts and a shirt that showed off her midriff would be far more comfortable in this heat than being burdened by dark pants, boots, a vest heavy enough to suffocate a child, and 10 or so pounds of weapons, but he could bet that she was having a much harder time with bugs. Thus, the first issue is heat. The second issue was that his canteen was running low. Additionally, he was certain that in about 30 minutes, he would be in dire need of a pee. Fortunately, most of the streams in this area were somehow freshwater. They emptied out into the sea after running from underground. He surmised, which was convenient when you needed to drink plenty of water because of the hot weather and careless clothing choices. He was reasonably certain that he was still some distance from the Hunter Nin's hideout, so it was better to look for water now rather than later. He hadn't gone very far from the location of their battle because he had only followed the ninja from 1800 yesterday until sundown. He was just getting back on the trail now. He might have had fun if he hadn't been here with the intention of killing and buried under all his equipment. A breeze would occasionally stir the leaves, causing a few drops of dew to fall on his face and cool his skin. A variety of plants, some with enormous pink blossoms and a strong scent that Ibiki might enjoy. The man enjoyed gardening. The more flowers the better, dappled the dark soil with sunlight. In fact, the scene was stunning, and it only got better when he eventually spotted a source of water. He might show Hinata this location if they had a moment after everything was finished. He cupped his hands together and raised them to his mouth after dipping them into the cool water, not giving himself time to simply savor the sensation between his fingers. The taste of blood took a moment to register. After making sure his canteen was full, Naruto got up and started to walk up the stream. 10 more minutes passed before he discovered what he was searching for. A corpse awkwardly concealed beneath a number of large leaves. A dark trail nearly encrusted with insects and flies that led from its resting place to the water. A path of broken branches and disturbed dirt led clearly away from the body, indicating that whoever had left it there had not taken any precautions to avoid being discovered. He carefully climbed up onto a tree and started jumping from branch to branch above the road, watching intently in case he ever ran into the enigmatic murderer. However, they didn't appear to have stayed, and it makes sense given how beautiful the treehouse was for them to spend time in. To avoid being impaled with 24 senbon rigged to a wire he'd triggered, Naruto had to quickly swap himself out for a squirrel after shaking his head and jumping down to get a better view of the forest floor. As a curtain was drawn aside and a contemptuous sniff was heard, he held his breath. He crept out of his hiding place and took a closer look at the wooden hut high in the trees after he was certain no one was looking. It was surrounded by ropes and ladders, and there were a number of additional traps hidden in other handy locations. He created a clone and sent it ahead rather than taking the chance himself. Fortunately, his nose was able to detect the bloodiest areas of the building, and his copy stayed clear of them, avoiding more traps until he was securely pressed up against the hut's side. He could now hear its occupants speaking, side to side with his doppelganger. A woman's voice said, "If you touch Zabuza-sama, I will kill you." The sound of heavy footsteps and a door swinging open was followed by the words, "TCH screw up again and you're out of this organization." Naruto fell to the ground and crawled until he saw 2 muscular guards, and Gato, the real thing, if it could be said, looked even crustier than the photo he had been given, steadily descend a flimsy metal stepladder and get into a truck, the back of which was tied down and covered with a green tarp. He signaled his clone to remain, then used the replacement technique to slip beneath the vehicle and reach the ground undetected, using muscle work to compensate for the lack of handholds and chakra to replace them. Zabuza cautiously scampered up and out from under the rig and crawled under the sheet as the shadows that had surrounded his home vanished in a matter of minutes. He paused to catch his breath and stretch his aching muscles, then looked around. Not particularly noteworthy, mostly boxes in fact, none of them were locked, and upon opening one, he discovered a tidy stack of machetes. The next held sai, and a long one held a crude but functional katana. Tightly wrapped packages of what smelled like marijuana were stored in a container close to his entrance. He chose not to sniff the white powder that was contained in the tiny bags beneath them. It was clear that Gato's drug business was flourishing. And he was getting ready for something, he thought as he looked around the truck of weapons. An assault, but against whom? Furthermore, where did Gato obtain so many mercenaries that he required this quantity of weapons? It's possible that Konoha's large weapons were more intricately crafted, but even so, this was too many for one store there with a sigh. He rested against the boxes until he sensed the truck reducing speed. A kunai made a tiny cut through the tarp, revealing a courtyard with just one guard watching this side of the truck. Gagging at the stench, he crept out from under the cover and waited behind a dumpster. Sakura was able to sit up and take a bath 4 days after Naruto left. Sasuke was able to burn down a tree with ease and without using multiple hand signs. And Kakashi was nearly fully recovered. Hinata, on the other hand, was so overcome with anxiety that she was always looking for him, justifying the use of chakra as a control mechanism. No one purchased it, but fortunately, they also didn't harass her about it for them. She finally spotted a spiky head of yellow hair during one of these searches, and she dropped her perimeter check to jump on him. She later regretted it when the closeness caused her to throw up. In addition to being drenched in water, he smelled like something the cat had dragged in. When she moved away and anxiously sniffed her shirt for any sign of his stench escaping on her, he laughed at her wrinkled nose and didn't pretend to be offended. "Guess the swim didn't help the smell, huh?" he asked. "What did you do? Crawl there through the sewers?" "No, I slept in a dumpster." "Get it right, Hinata." She took his hand and led him to Tazuna's house despite his stench, and she watched as he stripped down to his underwear outside, bringing only his vest and all of his weapon pouches onto the dock. "Come on, the shower should be free right now." He was bare and had very nice muscle on his back and chest, regardless of whether he reeked of waste and dripping wet from his swim mentioned earlier. She was eager to apply her healing ointment to the few bruises that were developing on his left side and around his shoulders. For some reason, Tazuna's shower was outside on his dock, hidden from view by a simple sliding lock and 2 heavy saloon doors. As was customary in Wave, she grabbed Naruto's things and went inside to get a towel. She told Kakashi about the Chunin's return, and he nodded in agreement. He was shaking the water out of his hair and smiling at her over the doors. When she came back outside, she returned the smile. "Hinata." "Yes, Naruto-kun? Give me the towel." She held it out, not even close enough for him to reach out and take it, but she said, "Sure, here." When he leaned against the doors, the corners of his mouth lifted, but he covered them with his wrist. "So cruel. I get back from a tiring, difficult assignment and I'm forced to streak just to dry off," he said. "I could pay you back later." She felt her heartbeat quicken as his grin spread across his face. "How about right now?" he asked. "Come here, Hinata-chan." Once she had met the door, she complied by stretching onto her toes to mash her lips against his, shivering as his moist fingers trailed over her collar and brushed her hair back. Her jacket dampened as the door opened inward and she was crushed against his bare front by one arm that was still warm from the water. He prevented her from taking a step back, turning them both away from the doors and guiding her into the damp wall while he played fully nipped at her mouth. When she put it to his, a familiar ache formed beneath her navel as one hand slowly dragged down on the zipper of her top while the other crept in and swiped his thumb over her nipple. His hands suddenly stopped, and when she opened her eyes, she saw him standing cockily outside the shower, wearing her jacket like an apron around his waist. She firmly declared, "I hate you," but she still took in his abs from her pleasant vantage point. "I wish the light were a little brighter." Before throwing her jacket, he walked sideways to the nail and wrapped the damn thing around himself. "You're the one who stole my towel," he said. "Come on, I've got loot to share." Considering that Uzumaki had been spying on a civilian business magnate, his mission had produced an unexpected amount of scrolls with jutsu-related information. "This is for you," the Chunin said, passing Sasuke a pink scroll. "And these are for you," he said, giving Sakura at least 4. "Don't lose or damage them. I have to turn them in to Konoha when we get back." Sakura pointed out that all 4 were for medical jutsu, and one was so sophisticated that it totally disregarded the framework the academy had provided for their healing. Either that, or it was written in a hurry, and the technique's user was expected to somehow blend the method demonstrated here with the standard pattern for medical jutsu. It would be impossible for someone like Hinata. But Sakura allowed herself a tiny smile, recognizing that she was more developed than Hinata. She would likely even defeat Sasuke-kun in chakra control. You can practice, and when you have the hang of it, you can take care of yourself. I have some bruises you can work on treating. After noticing the sour expression on the female Uzumaki's face, she assumed that a romantic injury treating session was scheduled. She got what she deserved for interrupting her life. Are you sure? I've only done the academy basics. That might even be enough. They're not that bad, just try to practice what's in the scrolls. He ignored his girlfriend's curled lip as she smiled sweetly at him and said, all right, thank you. She gave Hinata a sly smile when the boys focused on Sasuke's scroll. That one's actually really expensive, fireproof, too. It's for fire jutsu, which I think the Uchiha are supposed to be good with. Sasuke gave a wink. Uzumaki went on. Well, give those a try and feel free to write down whatever's in there so that you can keep training with it after we turn them in. Thank you, was Sasuke's curt response as he opened the scroll and looked at the illustrated forms and notes. Sorry, I don't have anything for you, Hinata, Uzumaki apologized. He had some other scrolls, but they were mostly chakra theory and I wanted to make sure to get these to Sakura. After Sakura's focus was diverted, Hinata gave him another glare while grinning and shaking her head. The pinkette tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and shrugged. Did men like damsels in distress because of her? Under Hinata's watchful gaze, Uzumaki's bruises vanished beneath the green glow of her chakra after dinner, and each of them went to their own sleeping area, or so she thought. Since she was confined to her room because of her injury, Hinata was happy to stay up late and continue studying the scrolls the Chunin had left her, so she did not take up her usual position on a mat by her bed. Except for the final scroll that Uzumaki-senpai had brought, the writing was legible and easy to read. It might not have been handwritten at all, but it was printed. This one was still tidy, but the notes had more personality. The descriptions of the flesh knitting together again had more details. The author had written something like an easy weave, fishtail braid, and a little sketch. Sakura mouthed the requisite hand signals and watched as a bright glow began to appear, turning almost neon as she increased the intensity as directed. Form a steady flow of hot chakra that gathers in the fingertips and not the palm, she said. The scrolls on her lap clattered to the floor as she hissed and jerked away, holding the light to her collar where she had unwrapped the bandages. Lower to the affected area, she said. Even though she had already dispelled her chakra, a throbbing, burning sensation persisted along her injury. She got out of bed shakily and went to look at her shoulder in the wall-mounted mirror where there had been exposed muscle. A tiny, braid-like pattern of skin had grown in its place. She had succeeded. As the scroll warned, the pain was fair, but it turned out to be searing. When Sasuke saw her bare shoulders and the way one arm held her unbuttoned pajama top to her chest, he looked straight down as the door opened. She clarified, I was testing out the medical jutsu. Did I wake you? HN. He shook his head, but he looked up inquisitively to see the line of flesh that had healed and was now climbing over her collar. The pattern could only be the product of jutsu because it was not natural. Did it work? Yeah, but it stings like crazy. Do you have any more painkillers? He said, you shouldn't take any more, but he still went to the wall and got her a bottle of pills. As Sasuke watched, she bit her lip and lowered her shirt further before gathering her chakra in her palm and repeating her previous actions. This time, she took a loud breath as the skin started to weave together again, forcing herself to endure the pain as he watched her work. Sasuke's face stayed expressionless. The only movement he made was to open the pill bottle. She yelled when her knees gave way and she was draped over Sasuke's arm. A small collection of tablets strewn all over the floor from his lunge for her. She had pulled her hand away as it approached the top of her breasts and smiled triumphantly at him. After giving her the container and placing her other arm over his shoulder, he grunted and dragged her back to her bed, picking up the scrolls from the floor and placing them on her nightstand. Chakra exhaustion? He asked. Thanks, she said, tracing the seam down her chest with her fingertips. The smarting feeling was momentarily relieved by the coolness. She placed the bottle on the table near her bed and reached for the fourth scroll, blinking when he pressed a pill into her palm instead. Can you hand me that one? She asked. Don't practice anymore tonight, I just want to. He went to pick up the capsules on the floor and said, it can wait. If you work yourself too hard, you'll be just as useless as Kakashi was. Do you need water? No. She tucked herself into bed after swallowing it dry. Thank you, Sasuke-kun. HN. Good night. Sakura woke up feeling more mobile in her left shoulder but also more exhausted and hungry than normal. It appeared that the jutsu had an effect beyond just sealing the cut. It was as simple as before the injury to lift the pill bottle, toss it into the air, and catch it. She smiled brightly at her crush when she ran into him in the hallway. She pouted, I didn't take any more, Sasuke-kun, in response to his raised eyebrow. They went through the den, where they discovered Hinata in Chunin Uzumaki's lap, clinging to his t-shirt, still asleep, though she couldn't be certain. One blue eye might have opened to watch them enter, and into the kitchen. which Tsunami had instructed them to raid whenever they wanted. The unwritten rule was to only eat meals with their hosts, who were probably already poor without them eating 5 more servings of food each meal, and to eat ration bars if they were that hungry. 4. Actually, she clarified while looking for mugs in the cabinets, it was Uzumaki's special diet. Now that she thought about it, she had never witnessed him eating. Sasuke said, "I'll get it," and placed the big kettle on the stove. "Sit down." He didn't have to be concerned about her straining herself because such insignificant movement would have been better for her muscles than remaining motionless. However, doing things for other people had a psychological effect that made you think you loved them even though you didn't, so she politely sat down and thanked him for his effort. "How do you take your tea?" Another mind trick is that people's names tend to be their favorite words, so saying them had a similar effect. "Anyway is fine. Sasuke-kun." Is an example. It was unfortunate that Sasuke's irises were too dark to monitor his pupils. "Oh. But we probably shouldn't use any sugar or milk, nay." The stove made a crackling sound. She questioned whether the bridge builder's gas bill would change significantly as a result. "Did you sleep well?" I think I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow," she said. Hinata's dry comment, "Good one of us did," broke the quiet atmosphere more effectively than the kettle's whistle. "Stop whining as if you didn't decide to sleep on the floor," Uzumaki said pleasantly behind her. She complained but was unable to conceal her mildly pleased expression, which only brightened when he gave her a cheek kiss and brought her another mug. As Sakura chirped, "There's more than enough for 4, Uzumaki-san." He smiled casually and said, "No, thank you, tea's not for me." "Are you sure?" Hinata firmly said, "Stop bothering my man," and extended her mug to Sasuke. As the prodigy poured hot water for them all, Sakura calmly ignored her and grinned gratefully. He then did the same for Uzumaki when he offered the group a box of tea bags. The blonde inquired, "What's on the agenda for today?" Hinata whispered, "Making out with me," into her mug. "She's not a morning person," Sakura said. "I know we share a room," and threw her pill bottle into the air once more. "We've been sharing a room for years and Naruto's always managed," Hinata grumbled. The ninja in question turned her irate face on him and smiled, "Drink your caffeine, dear," in response. "Training," Sasuke grunted, "and the tea's decaffeinated." Hinata glared at Sakura incredulously and slammed her mug onto the table. You, she said. "Yes, dear?" The pinkette smirked. "You told me it was caffeinated?" "It was the only way to get you to stop bitching in the morning. It's not like there's any coffee to give you." Sasuke arched an eyebrow and asked, "So she really can't tell?" "I could have told you that," Uzumaki chuckled, "once, for a month." "You bastards," Kakashi's voice said, "Ma, so noisy." Sakura had to suppress her smile to act like the gullible bystander. The market was quite a distance from Tezuna's house, and the shipyard was only a short stroll away. The phrase, "A ship is safe in harbor, but that is not what ships are for," was displayed on a plaque above the gate leading into the yard. The majority of the boats there were rusting and in need of some new paint jobs, and while they were wrecked and eerily quiet, the traditional pairing of sun and sea created a picturesque scene. 2 gulls were startled into the air by a deep moan that broke the stillness. "I feel like this isn't the place for this," Naruto grinned while rubbing Hinata's back. "You could at least try to keep quiet." She threw her bangs out of her eyes and leaned back into his touch, saying, "I don't care, your hands are magic." Not caring that they were the ones canoodling in a public area, he snickered and created a clone to watch for intruders. It would also protect their groceries, as they had already had to repel 2 snatchers who tried to take them and flee. Tezuna benefited more from letting the ninja do his shopping than Naruto had initially believed. After glancing at Hinata's face, his clone kissed her, nearly laying on top of her in its haste to close the distance between them. The original raised an eyebrow. "Really? You can't see her face, boss," his copy said. "Keep doing that," he said, nodding to Naruto. Naruto muttered to himself, "Who's in charge of whom?" but kept massaging her back, growing stern at Hinata's squeak and the sight of him unzipping her jacket with the original putting his mouth over her neck and the clone aiming for her cleavage. Both blondes lowered it off her shoulders. "And Naruto," snarled Hinata. He did get hard this time, and she was likely aware of it because she was pressed against him given that Hinata appeared to be sticking her tongue down his throat at the moment. His clone was probably not faring much better. "Hinata-chan. I want you," she sighed into his copy's hair, causing him to gasp as her butt rubbed against his dick that was really satisfying. He looked at his clone, who was blinking somewhere behind them, and said, It's almost 1900. Tsunami had hoped to finish dinner by 7, but she said, "Shit, they had been too slow, we'll tell her we decided to take a walk and lost track of time." The clone vanished, but Hinata spun around and threw one leg over his thigh before he could move at all. Her breath was sweet as she said, "Don't." She stood slowly, as if quick movements would startle him, and stepped over him before settling back into his lap with her thighs around his waist. She squeezed her legs to bring his groin against her core. "Don't get up." He closed his eyes, forgetting the humiliation they would experience upon returning to Tezuna's and the fact that, as two people who had only recently begun to truly fall in love, this kind of behavior was probably not what they should be doing. When Hinata began to move slowly back and forth and put her hands on his chest to calm herself, he leaned back and put his hands under her butt, making a funny noise in the back of his throat. She was staring at his face with a fierce flush on her face and her teeth digging into her bottom lip when his eyes opened. She complied when he tilted his head up for a kiss, yelling when he sat up right away and pushed her away with his body. What's wrong?" Naruto remained silent. He could taste the taste of her blood. He had made every effort to keep this aspect of himself from ever touching her. She curled up next to him after he had eaten a human for the first time, and he had been able to move past it when she returned from training bruised, bleeding, and in need of repair. He'd learned to cope with the fact that it had taken a great deal of willpower to ignore her monthly cycle. Hinata's taste was as clean and feminine as her scent. Her meat was most likely as fragrant as her skin, and while her blood might taste rich in large quantities, it was doubtful. With his fists in his hair, he growled, "Naruto. Shut up." Hinata frantically blinked her eyes. He smelled worry, sadness, and salt. He swallowed and said, "I wasn't talking to you." With a gentle touch on his shoulder, she asked, "What's going on, Naruto?" She said, "I." Her lip was now bleeding profusely. She was just looking at him, not even licking it. "You tasted my blood." It had the tone of an accusation. Thankful that the tightness in his pants was starting to ease, he nodded before getting up and grabbing the groceries because, well, this wasn't the moment before he could start to back away. Her arms were wrapped around him, her bangs grazing the back of his neck. Please don't get upset, Hinata. The only reason we're even allowed to know each other. We were 6, she screamed. You can control yourself now. You're not attacking me, are you? That's not the issue. What is? Your white eyes narrowed as she hissed dangerously. You still think I'm the Hyuga princess, don't you? Why do you think I'm better than you somehow? He didn't like them any more than she did. I know you're not a Hyuga. Still think I'm not sturdy enough to handle whatever crap you're dealing with inside your head. Hinata. Then what is this? She frantically gestured between them, breathing heavily and crying. If I'm your friend, then you should be able to trust me. Same if I'm your girlfriend. What the hell do you think I mean when I kiss you? She said. He swallowed, searching for the appropriate word. Her name was Hinata. She wasn't exactly what he considered a girlfriend, more than a companion. He had waited too long. She turned and started running, her feet being pushed off the ground by chakra with enough force to cause dents in her sandals. But he was quicker even when she jabbed hard at his ribs. His chakra-reinforced muscles refused to give, preventing her from struggling out of his arms. You're my most important person, Hinata, isn't that enough? She didn't move away, but she also didn't answer, simply removed her portion of the groceries from his grasp and bided her time until he released her. There was silence on the way home. On Friday, Uzumaki made the decision to depart, citing work, but he was most likely fed up with Hinata's lack of warmth, relieved that the tension would, hopefully, subside now that he was gone. Kakashi had released him without comment. When he wasn't looking, Sakura and Sasuke had made good progress with the scrolls. Sasuke had reduced much of the growth a half-mile away from Tezuna's house to charcoal, while the kunoichi had managed to close her entire wound and was now only using exercises to get her muscles up to 100%. All that remained was to persuade Hinata to use some acceptable forms of expression rather than using brawling as a way to vent her rage on Sasuke during spars, or to pay attention when he yelled to stop. Sasuke growled, jumping so near to Kakashi that Hinata hesitated. Enough, he said. You're not even trying to do anything, you're just attacking. Breathing heavily, Hinata said, the point is to take you down, idiot. Sasuke's right, Kakashi said. This is a spar, Hinata, not a way to vent out your frustrations. Take a break, come back later when you're thinking clearly. It took her hours to return before she did. Sakura joined them, oohing and awing over Sasuke's forms and finding it difficult to use a few herself. The white-eyed Uzumaki finally approached them with a tray of rice balls that Tsunami had prepared. After hours of this, he smelled tears in spite of his scarf. Hinata appeared shaky and paler than normal. He was going to give it to Uzumaki. Sakura was hysterical now, if she had previously believed Hinata was upset. However, aside from Sakura herself and Kakashi, almost everyone was in a panic. Additionally, Naruto Uzumaki didn't really count because he was bleeding from a hole in his stomach and was unconscious. Everyone pretended not to notice Hinata's tears and started cleaning up after the basics were completed. Kakashi's easygoing demeanor showed that he knew more about field medicine than she had thought, and Uzumaki's breathing, pulse, and temperature were as they usually were. Whispering to the group, "I'm going to make some food for him," Tsunami said. "No," Hinata said, breaking the solemn atmosphere, "he can't ease on a special diet, he can only eat meat." "Ah." The cost of meat was high. Sakura surmised, however, that you didn't really regret spending money on someone whose insides you had just seen. "I have shrimp?" Kakashi commented, "That should be fine," grinning. "Could it?" Hinata interrupted herself, "Could you leave it raw?" Tsunami's gaze widened. "Raw?" "Yes," Hinata shook her head after a few seconds, saying, "You know, never mind, I said anything, you don't have to make anything for him, I'm going out." A stinging sensation pierced Sakura's scar without waiting for her teacher's approval. She silently followed the white-eyed Uzumaki. She could hope that Hinata was too emotionally weakened to see if anyone was pursuing her, but hiding was pretty pointless in front of those Hyuga eyes. Before Hinata abruptly turned around, they had advanced a few yards into the trees on the property close to Tazuna's residence. "Why are you following me?" "Because your boyfriend's got a hole in his belly the size of my head and you're going on a hike and you turned down Tsunami's very generous offer of food for him. They can't afford to let him eat all their shrimp, anyway. So you came out here to get food?" Hinata responded by stalking over, dragging out a limp rabbit, and shooting 2 kunai into the bushes. After removing the knives, she sealed it into a scroll and plowed through the undergrowth, away from the pinkette, without even flinching at the sudden gush of blood. "Hinata. Shut up, you'll scare away all the animals." Sakura frowned. "I can get louder, I know. Tell me why Tsunami shouldn't feed your boy toy, and why you're out here killing things. It's therapeutic. And what's going on between you and Naruto, because you've been a total bitch all week," Sakura said. From beneath her fringe, Hinata gave her a fierce look. "Naruto only eats meat." "Yeah, you said that, and it's best if the meat is raw." She assumed she could see that, which was strange, more nutrients in raw meat. Hinata gave a nod. Sakura untied the ninja wire hanging from her hip and removed 3 shuriken, saying, "So you're out here making sure he gets some protein. I'm down for target practice, but what's going on between you two?" Relationship? She was likely to get no more than that from her. "Well, whatever." She raised a shiny throwing star between 2 fingers, aimed, and nearly struck a bird, which was subsequently impaled by one of Uzumaki's knives. "You're lucky you have those eyes, skank, because without them, you wouldn't be able to find a single thing in this forest before I took it down." Hinata purred, "You're crippled, so don't do anything too strenuous." "Strenuous my ass. You want a G?" "She's right, though," Sasuke interrupted her outburst. He also showed a fist with a shuriken carefully held between the fingers, saying, "Your throw was off." Hinata grinned and said, "I've already got 1 rabbit." "No jujutsu," Sakura replied, pulling her hair back. "No one messes with anyone else's kills. And we all meet back here in half an hour. Work fast. Uzumaki's got to get a lot of energy in him to recuperate." The other 2 jumped away after nodding. Sakura took her shuriken back. The outcomes were hilarious when 3 ninja, even genin, were paired against woodland creatures. They had to carry the carcasses back after skinning and disemboweling the ones that didn't fit in the forest because Hinata's scroll couldn't even contain them all. Uzumaki's experience with the procedure and his lack of reaction to it was a little unsettling. Sasuke was fortunate enough to witness the Chunin gobble up bag after bag of bloody rodents and birds when he woke up that night to a veritable buffet of dead things to nibble on. Other than Uzumaki's first request for water, they remained silent. He simply went to the kitchen, got a chilled baggie of "It Used to Be Cute," and gave it to the ninja. After giving him a glass, he then watched in awe as the man consumed it in less than 3 bites. After returning with 2 more bags from his second trip, the half-dead Chunin did not appear to be stopping. The door cracked open just as Sasuke was starting to count the stack of dirty plastic bags that had gathered behind the bed. "Is everything okay?" Uzumaki Chunin hesitated. Apparently, this madness could only be stopped by Hinata. He told her, "You handle this, it's your shift next, anyhow." She walked past him to her boyfriend's bedside after nodding. A nervous tongue was licking away the gore that covered Naruto's mouth and hands, his hair pointing in all directions, and his eyes were wide and bloodshot. With a sigh, Hinata said, "Just eat," and sank into Sasuke's chair. He did as he was told, but not at the crazy speed he had previously appeared to be now. He carefully placed the meat in his mouth, likely conscious of the blood splattering around and the fact that he wasn't even using cutlery while he was gorging. With a sigh, Hinata buried her fingers in her temples and closed her eyes. "What am I going to do with you, Naruto? What happened?" Zabuza's buddy was there. He has some technique that he uses to scoop. When he first dragged himself here, his abdomen was missing a good 2.5 inches, and Hinata's Byakugan focused on it. She bet that he would be up and moving around after the buffet, regardless of how many times they told him to sit down, since it had regenerated at least an hour and a half ago. Naruto nervously said, "I'm sorry, I'm not treating you like you can handle yourself," intending to rub the back of his neck but changing his mind upon seeing his red fingers. Hinata laughed. Yeah, ironically, the helicopter parent is the one with the gaping wound. Naruto continued to chew. "I didn't kill Gato. Was that your mission?" she asked with an eyebrow raise. "Yeah, I gotta do it soon, though, because they know where we are and they'll kill us all before they let me take out their meal ticket. Let me come with you this time." He and Hinata's eyes met. He glanced down at the bowl he was holding at her out the window. Her once more. "Okay, if Kakashi says you can, once I'm all better." Good answer. Ignoring his stiffening, she walked around the bed, pressing her lips to his and sticking her tongue into his shocked, slack mouth like two wet pieces of paper, their skins separated. "Good night." He gazed. She vomited as the door shut behind her. 4 days had passed since Naruto had drunkenly come out of the trees with his own blood all over his front, and Kakashi had consented to let Hinata go with him on his mission to kill Gato, as long as everyone else was completely recovered on the day of the assassination and she didn't pressure Naruto to do it right away. This was because, like Naruto, he was aware that Zabuza and his sidekick would soon be pursuing them. If Team 7 won, it was likely that both of them would be eliminated permanently, and they would have the opportunity to pursue Gato without worrying about Tazuna's immediate retaliation. Hinata would never have to face Gato or his guards without her team by her side if the copycat ninja's predictions came true, and they could leave the house with only a handful of Chunin Uzumaki's shadow clones watching over them. Since the blonde had returned, tension had only grown. Sakura's attempts to approach him during this time kept blowing up in her face. Hinata was itching to leave and drove Sakura up the wall as a result. Kakashi and Naruto were both waiting for an attack, and Sasuke was uneasy due to what he had witnessed while he was watching Naruto and kept everyone at a distance. While Naruto unofficially protected Tsunami and Inari, Kakashi had decided to have his entire team on the bridge with Tazuna today. This was a relief because it allowed him to do things like have a shadow clone walk Inari to his grandfather to deliver lunch rather than endanger the boy or the house. Kakashi saw the copy approach Hinata, who was idly braiding a few of her hair strands while gazing out over the water. Her hand shot out to dispel him before he could get within 2 feet of her, and it got caught in the clones. Kakashi reflected, "It was really a good thing I thought of this because Tazuna would have died if I hadn't." But not quickly enough, and the porcelain cracked, revealing an admittedly very pretty set of eyes that widened in surprise. Zabuza's masked crony ducked away from his kunai as he swiped, the man himself struggling to avoid the former Hyuga's jabs. Henge didn't work too well against someone with the Byakugan, especially not when that person was dating the attempted disguise. Sakura and Sasuke gathered nearer to Tazuna, who simply stared in disbelief at how rapidly things had deteriorated. Apparently realizing that he had almost been used as bait to lure the builder out, Inari blinked from his position behind Kakashi's legs. "You're not that bad," Zabuza sang to Hinata. "Or is it those eyes that did all the work? Maybe I'll carve them out and use them myself once I've killed you, Hyuga." With a nearly flawless gentle fist stance, she screamed, "Don't you dare call me that," and jabbed him in what Kakashi assumed were all the tenketsu on the mercenary's arm, causing it to fall limply to his side. His partner exclaimed, "Zabuza-sama," as if she wanted to join him. The man yelled, "Don't move," and gave Hinata a fierce look, but this time he was safe with a manic grin that caused his eyes to squint. He turned to Tazuna and exclaimed, "That old man dies today, Kakashi." The only thing that differed was whether or not his family died for him first. Sakura yelled, "Inari is here. You're not getting him, either." "And the woman?" Hinata stated icily, "Naruto is at the house," without emotion. "You left a cripple to defend the home all alone? You know, Gato sent twice the usual amount to take out the guard on the house, but I'm wondering if even one man would be too much," laughed the individual. He didn't even notice when he smiled at Inari, "snuck out with lunch. It was almost too easy to trick the brat into thinking I was his precious guardian." No one felt particularly like scolding a civilian for something none of them had warned him about, and even though Kakashi didn't think any of the ninja were Inari's most valuable possessions, the boy still winced when Zabuza laughed at his folly. Although he hadn't anticipated that Zabuza would attempt sneak attacks, it appeared that today was a day for surprises. The first person hurt on their side was Sasuke. Like a rabbit, Zabuza's friend dodged around Kakashi, made a quick move in Inari's direction, and then lunged directly at the bridge builder. She was prepared for him, and a white cloud of chakra made him fall like a stone as he jumped up to meet her, his mouth already hot with chakra. Sakura was able to separate herself from Tazuna in those brief moments, but it also meant that she had abandoned Sasuke. The woman interrupted Hinata as she hurried to his side for some reason. She had simply left him coughing up a lung onto the wood planks and grabbing his throat, which felt like he had fallen asleep with a bag of ice over it. To the dark-haired Uzumaki, the ice user whispered, "You harmed Zabuza-sama," as if in shock. Behind Hinata, Kakashi and Zabuza were fiercely slinging jutsu at one another, with the latter insulting him every other turn. Sakura, the fool, cautiously withdrew his hand from his neck as she edged closer to him, Tazuna clinging to her like glue. What did she do? Well, he wouldn't be crawling around if he knew, would he? He gave her a scowl. "It'll be okay, Sasuke-kun." He noticed, dimly, that he was crying, but that was only because he was having trouble breathing. "It looks pale." He made an effort to ignore her foolishness and concentrate only on not coughing. It was successful. He was able to inhale a tiny puff of air and exhale it normally as his throat relaxed. "Sea cold," he stifled. "Frostbite," said Sakura, "but if you can swallow, then your blood vessels weren't affected too much. You won't get gangrene." He got to his feet, noting to himself that he should not use the great fireball technique in case the heat exacerbated the pins and needles sensation that was now spreading through his neck. Between Kakashi's battle with Zabuza and Hinata's battle with the ice user, Inari stood there looking frightened. He nodded to the girls, surprised that the words even vaguely sounded like what he was trying to say. "Can you get Inari if I get them away from him?" he asked Sakura. Hinata was now avoiding and fisting her left hand, which he assumed was frostbitten, rather than trying to hit her opponent. With a nod, the pinkette said, "But you need to stop talking." He tried to figure out how to get Zabuza's sidekick to give Hinata some space without his fire, ignoring the irony of her statement not with his mouth. Anyway, he recalled that Uchiha had a tendency to be drawn to fire. The majority of their techniques dealt with fire, and whenever he expelled chakra, it was always already hot, as if it were on the verge of turning into flame. He had no prior experience trying to expel fire from his hands, but he assumed that today was a day for firsts. Anticipating the heat, he directed chakra into his hands, but was taken aback by how vibrant they appeared. He leapt to the Uzumaki's side and thrust both hands out at their opponent unexpectedly. Lightning, rather than flame, danced out of his hands, striking the woman in the chest and sending her hurtling across the bridge, where she struck the railing and became motionless. Everything ceased when Hinata turned to him with a grateful smile. Kakashi and Zabuza both turned to stare at his trembling hands, and both of them gaped at what the hell had just happened. "Haku! Get up!" Zabuza, who didn't even pause to think that his opponent was on his territory before racing over to Haku, launched Kakashi into the water in a desperate blow that appeared to have been charged with chakra. Zabuza quickly ripped off his subordinate's metal armor, revealing a severely burned torso, which, incidentally, lacked breasts, suggesting that Sasuke was mistaken about the ice user's sex, and what appeared to be a dead pulse on the boy's throat. Sasuke barely had time to process the sharp rise in murderous intent before he noticed Zabuza approaching and ducked once more. The missing nin charged at him, but he managed to escape. He didn't notice a change in the world for a moment, except that it was now much simpler to predict the attacks. He didn't realize until Sakura said, "Sasuke-kun, your eyes?" in the distance. At last, he had turned on the Sharingan as he had done with his friend. He charged up more chakra in his palms and prepared to send the ninja flying when he saw Zabuza preparing to attack him again. First, he saw Zabuza fall to the deck after his foot struck the back of his head. The second is an excruciating pain in his skull. 3 is black. When Sakura saw her love fall, she cried out, "Sasuke!" and nearly quit her job protecting Tazuna and Inari. Zabuza ignored her and focused on Hinata, the next target for his ire. If nothing significant was hit with skull fragments, he wasn't moved too soon, and 20 other things went according to plan. Sasuke might still live after such a blow. For Hinata, not so. This time, it felt like Zabuza's pain was just released, and Hinata was the target without giving her a chance to process it. Zabuza kicked her square in the chest. Sakura heard multiple snaps from her ribcage being crushed, then punched her again in the face with enough force to knock her flat on her back onto the wood planks. Zabuza's next attack involved opening arteries on both sides of her neck. With a single, purposeful swipe, she remained motionless. Sakura knew exactly which rules she was breaking at the moment, having read the handbook 100 times or more, but she didn't care. Since Sasuke was the closest, and at least had a chance of surviving, she rushed over to check on him. His vitals showed that he was still breathing, his pulse was still strong, and his eyelids fluttered when she called his name. At least it was safer to be closer to her. But Tazuna and Inari were hovering close to her, neither of them sure if she cared enough to defend them. If it came to that, she didn't know. When Zabuza's eyes met hers after he finished with Uzumaki, she corrected him, saying, "That wasn't quite true." Since she was still conscious, she was the next obvious target because it appeared that he was determined to exact revenge on her entire team for his subordinate. Until he realized Sasuke was still alive, that is. She dropped the Uchiha's wrist as if there were no pulse, tried to conceal her fear, and then got up to charge at the missing nin. He might take his subordinate's body and flee if she could simply divert his attention, or perhaps take a hit and then pretend to be dead. At least Sasuke would be alive, even if he were to defeat Tazuna and Inari first. Zabuza threw her all the way down the bridge as she charged, crashing into a stack of logs. Along the way she was unable to move after landing on her arm funny, and the shock went up her arm from her elbow to her collar. Regardless, she waited with her eyes closed. All she could hear for a moment was Zabuza's panting, punctuated by what sounded like sobs. He only decided to show it after the man's passing, but his pretty boy fan would be happy to know that he truly cared. Beside her, there was a faint sound that she recognized quite well, the sound of a ninja using the body flicker technique and then landing lightly on their feet a step. Oh my god! Killer intent was sufficient to cause her to perspire. However, she managed to remain conscious despite the fact that this was directly next to her dear god. She wanted to die and cease to exist. This was an agony that wasn't Tokei, Tanger, or okay. Hinata. Here was Chunin Uzumaki once more. He body-flitted in the direction of Zabuza and the others while yelling the name of her teammate. Even though Sakura was already leaning against the boards the builders would have been using, she managed to slump even more after he had moved away, releasing some tension and making her the source of all the remaining energy. She couldn't resist opening one eye, and she barely managed to see Naruto in a haze of red chakra. Human chakra wasn't red. Before a cloud of crimson blocked her vision once more. There was Naruto in a sewer. In terms of sewers, it was quite pleasant. He could still see, though he couldn't tell if it was because there was a little light present or because his eyes were just doing that no light necessary thing again. There was no terrible smell. No smell at all, actually, which was strange. And the water wasn't making his clothes stick to him uncomfortable. Actually, it wasn't causing his clothing to adhere to him, wasn't even moistening them. What on earth am I doing? He asked, and as though in answer, laughter reverberated all around him, causing the still wet water to ripple and bouncing off the walls. Head forward, jailer. Abruptly, Naruto realized his precise location. The tunnel had no twists or turns, but for some reason he was unable to see the Kyuubi until he did as it said and, after walking forward for 2 minutes, came face to face with it 5? He was unable to recall. "Very rude of you," said the fox. "You've been my host for 16 years and still this is the first time you've ever dropped by to say hello." It was the Kyuubi's death. The fox benignly smiled as if it didn't even notice, but it was clear that neither of them had said it. Its coat was patchy and losing color in places, and its big red eyes that protruded from its head were dull. Its cell had clumps of hair in different places. The giant fox's torso was covered in protruding bones. The fox's stance gave the impression that it simply didn't dare get out of his lying position because he wasn't worth it, but Naruto believed that this was more the case because standing would require a lot more strength than the demon possessed. With its tongue hanging out the side of its mouth like a dead thing caught on its teeth, the fox laughed at his disgusted expression. "Behold the Kyuubi no Yuko." Naruto was powerless to stop himself. "What's the matter with you?" "Ah, it's this damn seal, you see," it laughed, its red eyes bulging further. "Don't suppose you could help an old friend out and remove it?" "No, I've known you for longer than your parents, boy, and since before you met your lover." "Hinata." Naruto felt reality slam into him, seeing that he was waiting for an explanation. The fox continued. "I couldn't bring you here without severe mental distress on your part. You see, when you thought she was dead, that was almost enough." "Oh, the sweet one," the fox sighed mockingly. "I should be thanking her. I wouldn't be seeing you now if it weren't for her." Naruto realized, back with the demon brothers, it wasn't his own chakra that he had been using. The fox licked its teeth before letting its tongue hang out the side of its mouth once more. But, regretfully, it took the real thing to make your spirit weak enough to capture. "Why you? You set this up," yelled Naruto, stumbling awkwardly through the dry water to hold onto the cage's bars. He didn't flinch despite the fox's breath being rank and the metal being hot. "It drew lead." "Of course not, I'm not a monster. I couldn't," it confessed. "Any effect I may have on the world outside here would be through you, jailer." It curled its lip when he didn't back away. The meat, if the gesture was intended to be a flourish, it failed miserably. "Oh. Well, that certainly has to do with me," the fox purred, "but not nearly as much as it has to do with the man who drew this." Rather, the fox pointed limply at the piece of paper that was adhered to the cage's front bars with 2 of its tails. "The seal?" said Naruto, swallowing. The Yondaime intended for Konoha to be able to use my power with this, but he didn't know what he was doing, did he? Naruto nodded, glancing at the gaunt fox since he wasn't exactly years ahead of his peers in power, save for the few times he'd been so angry that he'd gone red. 16 years of having its power sucked out and redistributed to God knows where wasn't kind to the demon. The fox continued by saying, once I run out of chakra for the seal to absorb, I will die and the seal will flood your human body with demonic chakra, giving you your own painful death, that is, if you don't go mad and destroy everything around you first. You brought me here to tell me I was going to die? The fox growled, no, jailer, I had another reason for bringing you down here. Naruto looked the fox in the eye, blinked, and shifted his focus from his analysis of the dry water. With red eyes staring into Naruto's blue ones, the fox clarified, a demon does not go to hell when it dies. It does not reincarnate, or leave behind any trace of its existence apart from what is left of the chaos it created. Its servants disappear with it. Everything it owns ceases to exist. You're afraid, Naruto said, blinking once more. The notion was nearly absurd. And you're not? The fox laughed out loud. I know no human that does not fear death. Boy, you are no exception at this moment. Your heart continues beating. Your body and mind would fight the laws of nature to continue existence. I don't think that's quite right, Naruto muttered, because if it was, there wouldn't be ninja. People would avoid hunting in case they got lost in the woods and never came back, and they wouldn't swim for fear of drowning. Yes, there are other drives, in agreement with the Kyuubi. So what's the big deal? For the first time, the fox's words were laced with rage, causing their surroundings to tremble as it roared. I will not surrender my life to an arrogant human. After he steadied himself, Naruto questioned, and what am I, then? Why am I different? The fox turned to him and said, I'm stuck with you, that is the difference, and if you would agree, Naruto, I would ask a boon. Naruto kept a wary eye on the fox. What do you want? If the process continues, and the seal continues to steal my strength, I will cease existence. Even if the seal was removed, I doubt I would have the strength to leave your body before you died, and the flood of demonic chakra to your system would kill us both. But if you and I joined into one being, your power and my power would become one, and I will live on through you. With a frown, Naruto said, no deal. The fox gave him an expectant blink. That plan has too many holes in it. You could possess me, the power could drive me insane, and I could kill everyone. The fox sneered, no one that matters, surely, now that your lover is dead. Naruto willed himself not to cry in front of the fox and blinked frantically. It probably caught on, though, given that the fox was the source of his own enhanced sense of smell and the surrounding area lacked a scent of its own to overpower the scent of his tears. You know, power is not limited to force, the Kyuubi sang. I'm speaking of every capability of a demon. Death does not bind a servant of mine. Naruto did not speak. You could bring her back, boy. The fox continued to stare. A simple possession would, indeed, merely allow me to control your body for as long as it lasted with my chakra tearing it apart, but I am speaking of something far more. Your thoughts, your heart. None of that would be lost merely. You would be taking them with you to a higher plane. You would no longer be a human. What does that mean? The fox's smile expanded as he said, you would become me, boy, Kyuubi-sama. Scowled Naruto. That still sounds an awful lot like you dying. How does this help you? The Kyuubi's tails thrashed in frustration, but then instantly drooped with fatigue. It is not death, because my being lives on in you. Make your decision. I do not have much time. You have to swear to bring Hinata back, Naruto said, standing up straight. I swear. You have to swear not to hurt her. The fox grinned once more and said, I won't, she will be yours, boy. With a frown, Naruto declared, I just want her to be safe. I don't want her to be mine. The fox grinned broadly and said, give me your blood. Naruto squinted his eyes, give me yours first. Naruto scampered over to the fox, buried his face in the fur, and as easily as he had 100 times before, his teeth found the skin and tore through it as the fox howled with laughter and inserted one paw through the bars of his cage. The power in the fox's flesh was completely different from that of a human or animal. It was similar to tasting light, fire, or time. The fox pleaded, give me your blood, boy, before you lose yourself, and he pulled himself up through the cage's bars, exposing his throat and wrists to the demon, whose teeth barely made contact with his veins but were sufficient to release a torrent of vermilion. Naruto's world changed when the Kyuubi's tongue made contact with his skin. For the first time in 16 years, Kurama opened his physical eyes and looked around at the damage to his host's surroundings, then turned to the girl he was kneeling by. He smiled. Her skin was whiter than ever, her hair was drenched in her own blood, and her eyes were open too, but they were fixed on nothing. A knot in his chest told him that his warden could definitely see what was going on and was as upset as he had anticipated. Leaning down, he tasted the color that was painting her jugular. By flicking out his tongue, the hosts will overcame him and regained control of his limbs, saying, "You touch her and the deal's off." The anger that wasn't his pulsed from behind his breastbone, but it subsided when he returned a wave of irritation along the brief connection. "It's a delicate process, so I suggest you let me do what I need to unless you want something to go wrong." Perhaps not totally accurate. He had previously entered into contracts under duress, but in her case, it was slightly more crucial to exercise caution because his jailer might still withdraw at this time. Her flesh was delicious, and to his chagrin, he didn't know how to make it regenerate quickly enough for him to eat it and use her the way he wanted to. Not that he could. With Naruto correcting him in the interim, Kuruma ran his mouth over the opening on her neck, sucking up as much of the fluid as he could, then licking over her flesh when the laceration stopped giving it. "Sit up." The body stood up, staring at him with blank eyes. He put his lips to hers and used his strength to force his will through. Yes, he could have spoken them, but Naruto could have heard and might have ruined it in some way. In this manner, she would at least obey his commands before the Jinchuriki had a chance to protest. "You'll need to ask her to come back once the merger is finished." "Can't you do it?" The Kyuubi pointed to her and said, "This is just a marionette. It's marked with chakra to prevent us from unintentionally destroying her during the merger. She won't care if I disappear. I could make a formal agreement, but she will also vanish when I turn into you. All you have to do is touch her mouth with your intention. Eat some of her blood or flesh, and then, if she consents, give her some of your blood in return." The other said nothing. Last chance to back out, jailer. Kurama smiled, but he knew that saying this in front of the bloodied and bruised girl would only strengthen his warden's resolve. Leaning away from the body, he concentrated on the lifeblood and energy of his host, experiencing the physical pumping of the heart, the rush of air in his lungs as he breathed, and the circulation of chakra. Chakra poured out of him once more, but this time it was hotter, charring the area where he sat and cooking the blood nearby. That explosion had knocked out anything that might have been awake on the bridge. As the weight of the Kyuubi's power started to press down on the structure's planks, they creaked. He told Naruto, "Ignorance comes first. You have to get over it quickly or you might die before you finish." The boy gave him a wave of annoyance, which was not surprising given how little he had explained about the merger, but it would be alright if something went wrong. At least he had the corpse to step in. Kurama tipped his head back toward the sky with his remaining consciousness, opened his mouth, and roared, releasing more chakra. He liked to tamper with reality, and the more he got rid of now, the less his new body would have to go through during the transformation. The sky darkened at his command, and the darkness engulfed their surroundings. Sasuke was unable to sense his body. The alternative might be worse, he reasoned, since he had been kicked hard enough in the back of the head to knock him out. Still, though he could see his fingers next to him if he opened his eye and focused, and he could move them if he focused. However, he was unable to sense the hardness of the wood, the way his clothing felt against his skin, or the uncomfortable pressure of his forehead protector, all of which bothered him. He believed that if he focused, he might be able to get up, but all he could feel was a sticky face that was reminiscent of training sessions with Hinata and the time her boyfriend had torn out someone's throat, leaving him with a gummy redness in the crease of his elbow that he had been quick to wash off as soon as they had come close to actual water. Thus, perhaps it was better to remain horizontal for the time being. But the fact that he was still lying on the bridge and that it was so dark worried him. Were they defeated? He should have been waking up with his team, not on the deck, because they wouldn't have abandoned him for dead unless there had been a serious emergency. Even if he had died, they would have taken his body home if they had won the battle. Additionally, Zabuza would have killed them all by chopping them up or burning them if he had prevailed. It was very silent. The sound of the water was all he could hear. And another thing, Sasuke became more aware that he did recognize this noise. The more he attempted to identify it, he was able to raise his head and turn it to face the sound, though it took more work than he would have liked. Blood kept getting into his left eye, causing it to start crying right away, but he still saw him. Inari's face was aimed at him in a cruel irony as Naruto Uzumaki quickly ate up the boy's internal organs. He was now on all fours, tearing pieces away from the chest cavity like an animal and then scarfing them down, occasionally throwing his head back to make swallowing whole chunks easier. This was even worse than when he was using the meat bags. Sasuke watched this for an unknown amount of time. Uzumaki eventually dropped to his knees and started sucking marrow from the inside while snapping the ribs away, not like a child but more like someone finishing ice cream. Sasuke turned away as he began to remove the intestines, but he quickly regretted it because Tazuna, Zabuza, and his lightning-cooked friend were all lying close by. They all appeared to have received roughly the same treatment that Inari was receiving. The only difference was that Zabuza's head had lost its spherical shape. Then Hinata appeared right behind them. She was just staring while seated upright in the center of the bridge, not taking any action. She was sitting up, not even looking at Naruto as he ate a fourth human, but he couldn't tell in this darkness if she was hurt or even awake. Her head snapped toward him as if she had heard his thoughts. He was unable to read her face. Even breathing became difficult due to the sharp rise in the weight of the killer, intent in the air, trying to force his throat to relax and allow him to breathe. He placed his head back on the deck. It was unsuccessful. The vassal was exhausted, hungry, and extremely worn when he woke up. Fortunately, she didn't smell anything foul, but her entire body felt sticky and filthy, as if she had gone days without taking a shower after swimming in molasses. Rather, she was surrounded by the odor of the Kyuubi, which was explained by the fact that he was unconscious beneath her, holding her firmly to his front with one arm while tangled in her hair and holding her head in place just beneath his chin. She was incredibly hungry. She had to gently ease her hair out of his grasp and place his arm back on his chest before she could lean away without disturbing him. After 2 seconds of being supported by her legs, she was kneeling on the ground. She could use the wall to support herself and sway her way to the threshold on the second attempt. The house was as silent as a grave, but as she walked through the den, she noticed 3 bodies resting on the floor and against the wall in uncomfortable positions. Each body gave off a faint chakra pulse, indicating to her that it was alive. She considered getting rid of them right away, before they could do more than make her sleep, but the pain in her stomach pushed her to move forward and into the kitchen. Her weakness vanished as soon as she was near food, and she sprang for the first thing she saw, a bag of raw rice grains that was visible due to an open cupboard. Cupping her hands as if they were water, she pushed them as quickly as she could into her mouth. Her strength started to return almost immediately, and her mind was clear enough to recall that there was likely more food in other areas of the kitchen that was easier to eat. She jumped for the refrigerator and pushed the door open, grinning when she saw how much food was inside. After searching through a drawer of greens and 2 containers of leftovers, she found a small carton of eggs, cracked the top with a few finger taps, and drank the contents, doing this 7 times. Something clicked, and she started eating ferociously. She also tore open the 3 baggies of raw meat that were on the bottom shelf. Sucking on the ichor and sinking her teeth into the flesh, she emptied all the bags, then flipped them inside out and licked every square inch of plastic, followed by her fingers and any areas of the refrigerator that might have been splattered during her meal. Just as Hinata's tongue was about to touch the floor to mop up any leftover red from what she had just done, it struck her like a thunderbolt. She yelled and scurried away from the droplets, then froze, listening for any movement. No sound. She stared at the mess she had created in the kitchen. Food containers, eggshells, rice grains, and other items she had chosen not to eat were scattered about as if she had forgotten they were there. As soon as she stopped eating them, she was aware that she hadn't made it, but what had caused the obvious dent in the counter. The sheer amount of dried blood that was covering her front, peeling like old paint, made her take a deep breath. Naruto would go crazy. Oh no! Sasuke was lying awkwardly on his side on so many pillows that she was certain he would suffocate if he rolled forward even an inch. His head was covered in what must have been an entire hospital's worth of bandages. She got up and ran back to where she had woken up, but not before stopping to look at her unconscious teammates. Kakashi was mummified in a similar manner, but his face was spared. His neck, left wrist, and one leg were all wrapped in gauze that was 3 times their normal size. Hinata wondered what had happened after he was flung off the bridge because of the big white patch over the eye that contained his Sharingan. Sakura's voice was so quiet when she asked, "Hinata?" as if she was terrified to wake the 2. When the pink-haired girl instantly raised 2 kunai to her, she turned to face her and flinched. "Sakura, what happened?" The other girl's expression, which suggested that she knew the answer but was unable to express it, bothered Hinata. She said, "Are you okay? Tired? How long have I been out?" 2 days, Sakura replied in a whisper. "Have you slept?" "No, is Gato?" Hinata asked, taking a deep breath. Had the businessman simply forgotten about them? "I don't know. Am I the first one to wake up? Have you been guarding us all this time?" Sakura looked back at Sasuke and nodded. She appeared to have been crying and hadn't blinked in a very long time because of how bloodshot and puffy her eyes were. She must have slipped when Hinata shuffled through the room earlier, but considering that she had been up for nearly 3 days, she asked, "How did you stay awake?" Sakura raised her arm, which was adorned with tiny, braid-like scars from that one jutsu that seemed to be extremely painful to use, and said, "Soldier pills, and I pricked myself with kunai." The only thing Hinata could think of to say was, "I'll keep a lookout now, please go to sleep." Sakura stared at her for a long time as if she wasn't sure if she could trust her. Hinata was momentarily worried that Sakura knew what had just happened in the kitchen, but Sakura nodded appreciatively and simply lay down where she was, holding her knife close by and supporting her head with her forearms. Sakura jolted and stared at Hinata as she started to leave the room. Hinata made a tapping sound. "Byakugan, remember? I'll be able to keep track of you guys through the walls. I won't let anything bad happen to you, I promise." It was okay that Sakura was out midway through the second sentence because it allowed her to practice her dujutsu in front of no one. Whatever strangeness had caused her to eat 3 bags of cold woodland creatures. She was relieved that she hadn't just lied to her teammate and that she could still use it. She felt her mouth drop open at the new development as she then looked to see Naruto lying on the bed Sakura had been using for the past week or so. Naruto's chakra had always been abundant, but it was tinted slightly differently than everyone else's. She used it as a means of monitoring him. However, his chakra was now entirely different, red, to start, and it was flowing through his body at an erratic speed. In addition, there was an overwhelming amount of it. However, it appeared that he wasn't in any serious trouble when she got to his side and lowered herself on top of him as she had done previously. All she had to do was nuzzle his hands a little to get them to settle around her waist. Once more his breathing was also relaxed. His heart was beating slowly, and his face was composed and trouble-free. He moved with her, opening his mouth and letting out a low snore as his head sagged back to make room for her. She gave a small chuckle at the silence, but stopped when she saw his teeth. Although she hadn't previously given Naruto's pearly whites much thought, she became slightly alarmed as she watched them because humans only used their incisors and canines for tearing and their flat hind teeth for grinding. His canines, in particular, but also his hind teeth, all of which were sharpening, appeared to have become more noticeable. She had previously researched this topic after learning about the Kyuubi's involvement. Although foxes were omnivores, Naruto's nutritional requirements and his new dental structure seemed to be unaffected by this. She put a finger in his mouth and felt along the row of teeth, feeling harder until she felt her skin break. She quickly withdrew her hand from him and stared at it, then froze when the wound closed itself and only a dark, grayish line on her skin indicated that she had been cut. Naruto stirred beneath her, his hands tightening their hold on her middle. She saw his nostrils widen as he inhaled the air between them, and his eyes slowly open, blue but with narrow, feline pupils. "Hinata, are you okay?" he said, his eyes widening in alarm as he gaped at her. "Hinata?" She said right away, "I'm fine," and when he crushed her to his chest, she exclaimed, "Goo." Her hair crunched under his arm, which annoyed her because it had never been this filthy. It was disgusting. He pressed his mouth to her ear and uttered the words, thank God you're alive, Hinata," as if they were a mantra. "Naruto," she withdrew, "there's something really strange happening." He questioned her, "What time is it?" She looked at the clock next to the bed, then scowled at the glowing numbers that showed 15:27. 3 o'clock in the afternoon was far too dark. Was it broken, maybe? "I'm not sure," she said. "How are you feeling?" "Great. Well, hungry, but not too bad, actually." "Where was Tsunami?" "You'll have to hunt later, because there's nothing in the fridge." "Maybe the freezer? Tsunami might have some fish frozen." "Hinata, your teeth." When her canines turned out to be much bigger than she remembered, she blinked and cautiously ran her tongue over them. Yours, too." "I can guess why." She gave him a stern look and asked, "What happened? If you know, then you better explain it all from beginning to end." With his eyes fixed on her neck, Naruto gently ran his fingers across her throat. She followed suit, blinking when she sensed a line running from one side of her neck to the other, resembling a scar. He leaned in and buried his face in her neck, which was still crusty with blood, and her dirty hair. Was that why it was so rigid? "You were dead," he whispered. "You were dead and I lost it?" She tentatively stroked his head and gave him the firmest embrace she could while he was limiting her movement in this way. "The Kyuubi," she said, "offered me a bargain. If I merged with it or whatever, I could bring you back." When Hinata felt her own pulse, she pressed her fingers shakily to her wrist and started breathing again. Her heart skipped a beat when Naruto took her hand and kissed it. Did she have to die for him to start acting this way? And proceeded to her collar after licking her tongue over any brownish flakes on her arm until it was spotless. He didn't have an erection yet, but it would take very little work to wrap her legs around his middle, and perhaps a little more to give him one. She was acutely aware of their proximity when a slight ache began to develop just below her navel. He kept cleaning her with his tongue, now only grazing the tops of her breasts. His hair was in her face and he smelled of sweat, chakra, dirt, and blood, which was delicious. She resisted his lips because he reminded her of how dirty she was, but when they pressed against hers, she sighed into his mouth with a sour tang in its wake. His tongue swiftly slid inside and went around hers twice before retreating back to its owner. Neither of them had brushed their teeth in 2 days. After saying, "Hinata, you taste like rabbit," he gave her another kiss. She begged for a shower, a toothbrush, and some clean underwear at one point. It was incredible that neither of them had soiled themselves in those 2 days, and she deserves praise for not letting her crush or sensei smell like public restrooms in the interim. However, the more popular option was to simply kiss him. Who knows when he'll be his sullen self again? Even the part of her that was cheering for some dry humping had to pause and reconsider her priorities after Naruto's words reached her. When he whined and attempted to plant another kiss, Hinata pushed him away, feeling her resolve wane once more. "We need to stop, we both smell disgusting," Naruto said, begged to differ, while maintaining eye contact with the reddish-brown on her chest. "And, seriously, we need to figure out what's going on." She resisted his hold for a while before twisting away and getting to her feet. "You go shower, I'm going to straighten a few things up, like the kitchen, and see if Tsunami doesn't have any fish frozen." Naruto's expression changed to the more solemn one she was used to seeing, and he nodded before following instructions to get a towel from the linen closet in the hallway and head to the shower Hinata's side. It appeared that they would not be kissing again for some time, but in the meantime, after removing the bed's sheets, she proceeded to Tsunami's laundry room, gathering up a few more stray items of clothing and other items that had likely been dropped by Sakura while she was watching over Sasuke and Kakashi. She put about half of her belongings in the washer and left the rest in a pile close by. Before returning to the kitchen, she took out the frozen meat bags from the icebox and placed them in the sink to thaw before cleaning up the mess on the floor and making some tea to help her decompress. The kitchen was immaculate when Naruto got back from his shower, and she was clumsily chopping at the meat in the sink to try to break it up into pieces so they would thaw more quickly. Soon after, Naruto came out of the hall looking much more alert and wearing clean clothes. "Has anyone else woken up?" "Sakura was awake when I woke up, but she was way out of it. She was only staying up to guard and take care of Sasuke and Sensei." "Sakura," Naruto scowled, as though he was giving it some serious thought. "I can't remember anything right after the merger very well, but I think there was something about Sakura." "That would do it," Hinata scowled. "She was really jumpy. Do you think she saw you?" She recalled what it was like to watch Naruto tear into someone without any control, even though she was only 6 or 7 years old when he attacked that drunkard. Naruto raked a hand through his damp hair and said, "Maybe, probably, she must have been terrified. Why did she stay at the house, then? She must have known I was also here." "Because Sasuke was here," Hinata mumbled. "Or maybe you told her to, and she was too scared to disobey." Furiously, Naruto said, "I can't believe I don't remember," before turning to face her. "Your turn to shower, I'll handle that," he said, gesturing to the sink's bloody mess. "Don't forget a towel." She let go of any regret she had about ending their makeout session when she noticed how much filth was accumulating at her feet in the stall. Naruto tore up the thing Hinata had been working on, and instead of waiting for it to thaw, he filled a pot with water and dropped the other sacks inside to perhaps help them thaw more quickly. He then sucked and chewed on the frozen pieces. He was even more frustrated because he was unable to recall any of the events that transpired during the merger or the terms of the agreement he and Hinata had made. The Fox had referred to it as a contract, but that would imply that Hinata had either made a commitment to him in order to bring her back to life, or that he had promised her something in exchange. He hissed and felt along his molars for any chinks that might have formed as a result of the sound that came from between his jaws, like an ice cube cracking. Not at all, although perhaps he shouldn't be biting down on frozen bones anyhow. It appeared that his new teeth were stronger than his old ones. Sakura had probably been too busy to empty the trash can, which was almost full of used bandages, when he spat out the rest of that chunk and tossed it in. He opened a bag and saw the water. It was in turn red, then carefully tore a piece off because some of the stuff in the pot had begun to soften and separate. Warm meat was infinitely preferable to cold and iced meat, but this was all he had at the moment, and it would likely be a bad idea to leave the house to hunt at this time. The bloody water had made his sleeves droop. It was bad enough that his hands were filthy and his mouth was likely lined with it, but his jacket too. He nearly missed the gasp and cursed. He swore again in his mind as he turned. Sakura appeared to be terrified but also bleary-eyed and on the verge of fainting from exhaustion. The hoarse squeal that came out of her mouth, almost as if she were possessed, was too low to disturb the guys in the other room, but it told him that she was aware of what his special diet was. Or perhaps she had eyes that could detect blood when it was present in her environment, and after 3 days of being afraid her teammates would perish, her mind simply didn't want to deal with this nonsense. He wiped his mouth to remove the color and turned to her cautiously, ignoring his jacket. "Sakura, don't freak out." Her bloodshot eyes stayed wide and terrified, staring at him like a lit exploding tag even after she stopped talking. "I'm not going to hurt you, okay? I don't know what happened between the bridge and here, but I'm not going to hurt you, promise." She stammered. Where's Hinata?" Her gaze was fixed on his crimson hands, which he promptly washed under the faucet. "She's taking a shower. How are you feeling?" he asked. She responded by bending over and throwing up neatly on the ground before staggered back before her head struck a wall. He grabbed her and dragged her into a chair. He then got a glass and filled it with water from the faucet. She took it, drank it all, and then puked again, only this time she missed him because he had moved away. Perhaps that wasn't the best course of action. Hinata said, "Okay, gross," from the doorway as if she didn't want to get dirty again so soon after being cleaned. She wrinkled her nose at the acidic smell and clumsily rearranged her towel dress. "I'll clean up," Naruto said to her, attempting to keep Sakura from falling off the chair. "Get changed quickly, please, and see if you can't bring a bucket over here." Sakura, take a deep breath, inhale. She did. Exhale, inhale again, he said in a quiet, calming voice, trying to make his face reassuring when she gazed at him. She exclaimed. "Don't talk, you're safe, and whatever you have to say can wait, okay? Just breathe, in and out." Hinata would have liked to give it a little more thought when he returned wearing one of his shirts and without a bra, but the moment wasn't right as he cleaned the floor and then went to make the bed he had slept in again so Sakura could use it. She switched places with him. As they waited outside the shower stall for Sakura to wash, he told Hinata, "It's probably the soldier pills, in case she fainted, and stress, but the pills can't be helping. She needs sleep, but they're not gonna let her go easy." She was given a set of pajamas, a bucket on the floor, a glass of water, and rice crackers, if she could keep them down, and told to go back to sleep if she woke up. They also promised to come get her if anything changed with Sasuke or Kakashi, but they asked that she please get some rest. Naruto and Hinata then went back to the den, where Sasuke and Kakashi were still standing in the same spots and didn't appear to be any more awake than they had been an hour earlier. Naruto blinked. "Hinata, does Kakashi's eye, is it still there?" The chakra vessels around her eyes bulged, and she was staring at her teacher as she raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh, God, I didn't think to check." Naruto knew when she began to approach him, as though to confirm Byakugan users could see better without having to move closer. "No, his Sharingan is gone." Wave was despised by Naruto. It was still dark when Sakura woke up, and she had no idea how long she had been asleep. She froze for a moment as memories flashed back to her as she got out of bed, barely avoiding dropping her foot into a bucket that had a thin layer of her bile and spit on the bottom. She slowly turned to face the room's mirror and lifted the long sleeve of the sweater she had slept in, revealing a jumble of tiny scars that were all miniature versions of the enormous scar that ran from her ribs to her collarbone. She looked into the face of her reflection, breathing deeply and maintaining an expression devoid of emotion. She recited, "Panicking is stupid. It does nothing." She walked to the den and opened the door after taking a few deep, soothing breaths. The whole space appeared to have been cleaned. Sasuke was still asleep, but he had only one pillow and fewer bandages than before. Kakashi left a large pitcher of water and a glass that was mostly empty were placed beside his head, and his bed had been pushed closer to the wall. She inhaled deeply once more before continuing on toward the kitchen. "Yo," Kakashi said, appearing exactly the same as usual save for the sling covering his left arm. "Good morning." She said it more because she was used to saying it after waking up than because it appeared to be morning. "Is there anything to eat?" "There's some canned fruit in there," he said, gesturing toward a shelving unit. She opened a can and started eating, but they didn't talk, and she thought the tension had gone up a notch as she thought about everything that had happened. She sucked thoughtfully on her spoon and had to stop when her mind started thinking things that made her arms stand on end. Kakashi lightly tapped the spine of his small orange book on the table and said, "Hinata told me that we have you to thank for the masterful care of Sasuke and I. You went a little crazy with the wrapping and patting, but otherwise, well done." She made an effort to ignore the more repulsive part of caring for Kakashi during his 2 days unconscious. She would stop eating her fruit. "Sasuke is just fine," he said, "and actually, Hinata, Naruto and I worked to examine his head for skull fractures and the like, but it seems like it's nothing that serious. Even he's woken up a few times already." "Yeah?" Sakura blinked. Haven't learned much other than he can pour himself water and use the bathroom on his own, but I think we're allowed to be a little optimistic." "And Hinata? And Naruto? They're getting the laundry. Tsunami's dryer did something funny, I think, and they decided to hang it up instead. No clouds in the sky, so they figured it was safe." "Do you know how long I've been sleeping?" Under the patch that was visible through his slanted forehead protector, he scratched, "A little more than a day. Hinata put you to bed, wasn't it?" Sakura chewed half a pear soaked in syrup and recalled that it had indeed been Hinata once Hinata had returned. Uzumaki had mostly stayed out of her way to ensure she was no longer in a panic. What initially made Hinata like him? She started to recite a list of Uzumaki's positive traits. Shunin, in a department at 16, apparently a good kisser, courteous. When compos mentis, not ugly, etc. Eats human beings. When Zabuza first mentioned Uzumaki's nickname, she had assumed it was a metaphor, wasn't cannibal. The kind of moniker you wanted if you were in T&I. It was definitely gory, something that evoked images of death, agony, or other eerie things. Who in their right mind would actually eat people in order to extract information? He wasn't thinking clearly. She had been shaken awake from her faint on the bridge by Uzumaki, but not, who then practically shoved Sasuke's body at her. He had Kakashi slung over one shoulder and Hinata over the other. He then walked all the way to Tezuna's house without waiting for her to follow him. She did, but only because the adrenaline in her system allowed her to sling Sasuke-kun over her shoulders in a fireman's hold and walk slowly after him, praying that she wasn't further damaging Sasuke's skull by being too rough. Kicked open the door, dropped Kakashi like a sack of rice in the entryway, and simply entered the bedroom she'd shared with Hinata without saying a word. Sakura recalled carrying Sasuke into the den in silence, coming back for Kakashi and dragging him in as well, but then crashing onto her knees and sobbing for an indeterminate amount of time before she could do anything else. Back then, she could sense the constant cloud of malice that hung over not Uzumaki, seeping through the walls and into the floor and furniture. She couldn't tell how many of the marks on her arm were there for reasons other than staying awake, momentary madness. The two Uzumaki entered with baskets full of dry, clean clothes as the door to the connecting hallway, which led to the laundry room and then outside, open. Sakura could distinguish some of her clothes from those of the others. Hinata put hers down on a chair and stretched, saying, "That's all of it." Shunin Uzumaki's cat-slit eyes followed her every move like a hawk observing a rabbit. As Sakura watched Hinata reprimand Kakashi for not making them tea while they were out working, her sensei merely pointed at his sling and began complaining about how inconsiderate today's youth are. She thought that he still wasn't ugly, but that whatever it was that had made him seem so amiable before was being taken away by the eyes and the teeth. Uzumaki grinned at Hinata's pout and Sakura tightened her grip on her spoon. This seemed to be the outcome of a compromise reached between not Uzumaki and Hinata's Naruto. "And you, Sakura?" She caught Uzumaki's attention. If he had called her that, she might not have been able to control the shiver of disgust, so she was relieved he had dropped the "chan." "Are you feeling better?" She grinned at him and said, "I'm feeling great," but when he didn't return the smile, she felt her insides tighten in terror. Was it her, or was that a menacing tone? "That's good." She turned her pleasant face to the company after taking another deep breath and feeling good. Dependable oxygen enter her lungs. "What's on the agenda for today?" Kakashi responded without even raising his head from his book. "Today's the day you're going to look for Tsunami." Naruto wasn't the one assigned to protect Tezuna and his family, but since he was the group's most skilled shinobi at the moment and Kakashi wasn't in the mood for him to keep running away and doing his job, he accompanied Sakura and Hinata to find the bridge builder's daughter. The sky had not changed at all, even though he had woken up at least a day earlier with Hinata on top of him. Covered in her own blood, the dinky town had been plunged into a permanent night, and its inhabitants were doing their best to cope with it. The shops were open and the street lamps were lit. They weren't particularly busy, but then again, they hadn't been when he and Hinata had gone grocery shopping before the sky had grown dark. He didn't worry too much about that because he had used genjutsu to conceal his eyes, teeth, and whiskers while they were at it. This was done to prevent him from frightening the villagers the way he had Sakura. Even after Hinata bought a small container of instant coffee and some sugar for the house, people still gave them a wide berth when they walked, not even trying to steal. Why she liked it was beyond his comprehension. Yes, it smelled good, but without milk, it tasted like ashes, and sugar didn't do much to improve it. Sakura whispered, "Excuse us," to a man smoking beneath a lamp before asking if he had seen Tsunami or perhaps knew where she might be. They were told not to go looking for her, but they didn't really hear back. Similar findings had come from other investigations. Sakura appeared to have been expecting it, but Hinata's face changed slightly when he dropped the genjutsu and pushed the man against the lamppost, leaning in and tilting his head back slightly to see the new shape of his pupils. "We're not looking to start trouble," Naruto replied quietly, "but we've got a job to do, just like you, and it's to make sure she stays safe." "Yeah. Can't do that if we don't know where she is." "D-dem." Naruto grinned and licked his tail. "No better way to defend against monsters than by getting a scarier monster, right?" he asked. "We're not gonna harm a hair on her head, K. We just want to know where she is so we can do our job and get our pay." The man stammered, "She's at the Kajitsu house," as a cigarette slipped from his lips and bounced off Naruto's shirt before it hit the floor. "Past the shipyard, close to the old beach." "Thank you kindly." A few minutes later, while they were making their way to the shipyard, Hinata remarked, "So anyone know how to tell an old beach from a new one, ignoring the fact that we all live in a village situated inside a giant forest?" Naruto gave a shrug. Sakura turned to Hinata, and Hinata turned to her. "Maybe it used to be their main beach and some other one got a waterslide or something." Whatever the answer, They soon found themselves facing a charming little cottage that was squarely planted in the middle of a group of jagged rocks a few yards from the front door. A single enormous dock that was loosely supported stretched out over them into the water. Sand surrounded it, and if there had been, well, sun, for one thing, and fewer rocks, for another, it might have been a nice place to go on vacation. It's likely that the new beach had fewer spikes. The front door opened more quickly than any of them had anticipated when Sakura hesitantly knocked, revealing a frowning woman who couldn't have been much younger than 30. "What do you want?" Naruto discovered they had never been given a last name. "We heard Tsunami might be here." She said that was foolish? The bridge builder's daughter? "You heard wrong." With a slam, the door closed. Naruto attempted to hold back a snort. Who closed the door for Ninja? It wasn't like they wouldn't break in through a window to get back at you, even if you were friendly with them given all the times he'd warned her to stay away. It was truly a miracle that Enko had never broken into his apartment. Hinata knocked again. "What now?" Byakugan. Tsunami's inside." It was pretty damn helpful, even though he could never be absolutely certain that Hinata wasn't spying on him. "No, she isn't. She's sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of tea looking like she wants to climb out your window." "The only people in here are me and my cat," said the woman, "so I'll thank you not to go throwing accusations around." If she didn't stop, Naruto's snort would become a full-fledged laugh. "Now she's coming over. She's recognized my voice. Hello, Tsunami." It appeared as though Dazuna's daughter had not slept for days, and she was clinging to her robe as if it were her only hope. "You're all alive." The woman who had answered the door was staring at her as if she was incredulous that Tsunami had stopped by. "What are you doing? I had them thinking I was alone and you just waltz out here into the open." Naruto used a hacking cough to cover up his outburst of laughter, but Hinata's frustrated glance at him made it clear she wasn't duped. After a moment of awkward silence, Tsunami's friend sighed loudly and said, "I suppose I have to invite you in. Now just as well there's a new pot of tea on." He and Haru Kajitsu, who was fast becoming one of his favorite people, moved the table to her couch so that everyone could sit down because there weren't enough chairs for everyone. As soon as their host had finished serving the apple cake to everyone, Hinata leaned into him with a plate of it, while Sakura, Tsunami, and Kajitsu-san each claimed a chair while he sank into the love seat. They continued to engage in small talk until Haru finally brought up the topic. Around a large piece of cake, the woman remarked, "Bad luck, everyone says. Sky black as night at 11 in the morning. Who's even heard of that?" "Huh." A tiny spray of crumbs covered her end of the table, but she seemed to be oblivious to it and washed the treat down with a large gulp of red tea. When you didn't return, I came here," Tsunami said. Glaring at him, he briefly feared that his genjutsu had somehow vanished before realizing that she was probably terrified of his words regarding Tazuna and Inari. To his shame, he also had nothing to report. He told her that, "We woke up at the house with many injuries and no memory of what happened, and that we waited a while to recover and then went looking for you." Sakura's expression when he told Tsunami this made him wonder if it was entirely true, or if she did know where Inari and Tazuna were and had simply not mentioned it. "My son and my father, do you know?" Sakura was looking for a response, so it took him a few seconds to realize that everyone was staring at her. "I'm sorry, I don't." As an interrogator, Naruto was not pleased with that response. Kajitsu waved her arm at her window, which appeared to have had a black cloth pressed against it from the outside. "Well, if it were me, I'd wait till all this has passed. People have been saying it's because of doomsday and, I mean, I'm not superstitious, but when there's talk like that, y'all gotta use some common sense. Stay here. The sun has risen just fine for the last billion years. It will return eventually." Hinata nodded. "We're not superstitious, either, Kajitsu-san, and we'd love to take you up on your offer, but half our team's back at Dazuna's and we want to get home as soon as possible." Putting both hands on Sakura's arm, Tsunami begged, "You must find out what's happened to my family," causing the pink-haired girl to jump. Naruto said, "Of course, Tsunami-san," projecting as serene an aura as he could. "We're curious about these events as well. We'll definitely find them." Despite Hinata being the only one who had actually eaten any of the cake, the woman nodded and helped her friend pack up more for them to take with them. Sakura inquired, "Will you be staying here in the meantime?" Tsunami gave a nervous look to Kajitsu after nodding. "If that's okay?" "Of course it's okay," she said with a squawk. "Honestly, Tsunami, will you stop acting like we're not besties? It takes doomsday for you to come over. What kind of a friendship is this?" Sakura appeared somewhat calmer after being exposed to people outside of their gloomy little world inside Tazuna's house, and Hinata simply linked hands with him and walked silently by his side without making an effort to engage in conversation. The walk back was much more laid back than it had been when they had first started. Naruto's relief at knowing Tsunami was safe once they had approached Tazuna's path was soon dashed when he realized they would probably have to return to the bridge and that he probably wouldn't like seeing whatever had been left there following his merger with the fox. Hinata had ripped out the throat of the last person to attack him, and that was when he was largely in control of himself now. Sasuke-kun. Sakura rushed past Hinata and him to embrace the shaky figure in the house's doorway. Despite his apparent desire to push her away from him and into the water, the Uchiha lacked the strength to do so, at least not yet. Rather, he inspected Naruto with his black eyes, just as Inoichi had done when he had first concluded an interrogation when Sakura's extra weight caused the other teen to step back and nearly fall. Naruto dropped the genjutsu and experienced a momentary rush of satisfaction. He said softly, "Hey, Sasuke," raising the hand that wasn't holding Hinata's to greet her, "How are ya feeling?" The narrowing of Sasuke's eyes said, "Better, but that's not important. Explain what happened to you on the bridge." Kakashi wasn't too sad for Sasuke because he had also never received a satisfactory response to the question of what had happened to Naruto on the bridge. Ignoring Sakura's reprimand and Naruto's frustrated sigh, Kakashi once again gently scratched beneath the bandage covering his eye because the area beneath his hite itched. Since Sakura had most likely taken off his scarf to better clean the area, it was considerate of her to keep his entire face a secret. Very good. When it came time to turn in progress reports, he would keep that in mind. While Naruto patrolled the perimeter outside as best he could, given that half of it was water, and probably ate something dead to keep everyone from becoming even more agitated by eating at the house, Team 7 was all tucking into a meal of rice and canned goods, with Hinata adding coffee to hers. Although Tsunami was safe, nobody could really blame her for not choosing to go back home in any case. None of them truly understood what was happening. Kakashi thought about the text before him and scowled more. As soon as he had woken up, he had noticed that his eye was gone, and not in the conventional, "part of my face is missing an ow" sense. More accurately, he had a lot more chakra when he woke up than usual. His Sharingan constantly consumed power to function, even when it was closed and hidden, regardless of when he was actually using it. To him, that eye had represented more than a weapon or a remnant of a long-gone clan. Every time he fought, the Sharingan reminded him of the very reason he was fighting. That was a source of power. It had not sufficed. A part of Kakashi thought that maybe he didn't deserve Obito's eye in the first place if he hadn't been able to protect it. After all, protecting it from adversaries who might attack Konoha had been a part of his job. It had to be recovered because, whether Kakashi should have it or not, the masked ninja who had taken it most certainly didn't deserve it. Like the clothes Naruto and Hinata had thrown in the washing machine as soon as he had woken up, the ninja had been about half his height, had black hair, was slender, and smelled of blood and corrupt chakra. The face was concealed by an orange mask with a swirl pattern and no noticeable eye openings, but it did have a few tiny holes incorporated into it so the wearer could see their surroundings without being identified. He hadn't approached to take a look. Other than that, they wore all black, form-fitting clothing, had no exposed skin, and had no other distinguishing features. It was all right that smell was enough to go on, and he had previously killed people with even less. To describe corrupt chakra was scarce, but blood was abundant. Toads didn't exactly have the best sense of smell, but he might just give his team a vacation when they got home and then return to conduct a proper investigation, or he might get in touch with Jiraiya and his spy network and tell him what to look out for. However, it was something. After that brief lip-locking session on the bed, Hinata had been correct and there was no more kissing. Considering how fucking tense everyone was and how Sakura kept acting as though Naruto would eat her, it didn't feel appropriate to start some up either. It was pretty damn obvious, but perhaps she didn't think she was. It irritated Sakura and Sasuke that they were both cautious around him in her free time. She stayed near Naruto with the help of his sensei. Sakura performed medical jutsu on Kakashi's wrist and ankle, while Sasuke did whatever his highness did in his spare time. She and Naruto sat together for the second time today in an attempt to find some peace amid this chaos. He had been keeping her at a strictly appropriate distance for some time, and she figured that would only change once they got home, even though she would have liked to be in his lap, or it had better, anyway. Hinata thought about the tiny gray line on her finger where she had split the skin on Naruto's teeth yesterday. Well, it had probably been yesterday. While the interrogator brooded and stared off into the distance, would she cut herself again if she did? She carefully drew a thin, red line along her forearm, avoiding any vital veins, using one of her sharper kunai. When the blood appeared, Naruto's eyes shifted to her arm in her peripheral vision. She saw his mouth relax as the cut swiftly closed over. She turned her arm over, revealing the fish belly white of that skin, and touched the tip of the kunai to the web of blue veins at her wrist after they had been staring at each other for some time. "Don't." Naruto pushed the blade away from the joint with a warm hand. Her breathing quickened when, as before, though with a little more blood escaping this time. The cut sealed itself, leaving only a clean slash beneath some red. She ignored him, twisting her arm out of his grasp and then purposefully splitting the skin where it was most important not to. For the few seconds that followed, Naruto remained silent. He stared at the scar for a good minute before turning to face her, or more specifically, her neck. The thick line curved like a necklace around the front of her throat, and her fingers reached up to touch it again. There were a few more on her back and around her ribs, but this was the biggest, darkest, and most unsightly one. If her body had healed itself in this way, what would it have taken to leave such a large scar? It's no surprise she died. They sat there side by side without speaking or making physical contact until Naruto finally let out a sigh. I think we should go. Sun's not gonna come back for a while if it does, and we should just get it over with while we can. You wanna go to the bridge right now? You ate, right? And Sakura did, too, so the three of us can go, because Sasuke is still recovering from his head injury and Kakashi can't walk too much right now. I wanted, she said uncertainly. All she wanted to do was hang out with him, although it wasn't particularly romantic. Awkward time spent together was preferable to awkward time spent alone. I'm sorry. Although Hinata wasn't positive, she estimated that Naruto was genuinely apologizing for roughly 5 things at once. When he apologized to her, she seized him before he could rise, turning him to face her and pressing her lips to his while holding his face in her hands. He remained motionless, allowing her to do so while remaining as unresponsive as her pillow. She withdrew. She had touched him with her filthy hand, leaving a stain of her blood on his cheek. Noting how his heartbeat quickened beneath the hand she placed on his chest to steady herself, she leaned in once more and licked over the splotch, dragging her tongue over his skin multiple times to get rid of it entirely. His cat-slit pupils had widened nearly to their normal size as he eyed her solemnly when she leaned away, whispering, "We had a deal, remember? I'm just as scary as you are." She awkwardly balanced her weight between her palm on his front and her knees. "I don't think that's quite right, Hinata-chan," he said, shaking his head. "I am not afraid of you," she scowled. "Well, maybe you should be," he said, his scowl revealing pointed teeth. "Hinata, look at me." "I do often," she laughed, "not just your face, either." That little crease over his nose appeared as his eyebrows drew together. "Hinata, look what I've done to you." She snorted. "Yeah, I can piece myself back together." Tease a crying shame, especially with me being a ninja and all. Can't imagine when that could come in handy. She slammed her lips into his a bit too hard before he could say anything else. Both of them grimaced and pulled away as his head struck the wall behind him and their teeth clashed. Hinata tongued her teeth for any difference, at least from her new set, while Naruto rubbed the back of his head vexatiously as they glared at one another for a few seconds. Then Hinata let out a sigh, putting aside her apprehension about touching from the previous few days. She crawled over, positioned herself in his lap, and curled up against his torso, gratefully nuzzling him when his arms instinctively wrapped around her in return. "Do you like me less because of this?" she asked, pressing her hand into his shirt. "Naruto?" For emphasis, he tightened his grip on her and tensed, saying, No way. Hinata, you're important to me, really important." "Okay, good." She kissed his cheek and then used a finger to turn his face to face her, kissing him on the lips once more. "Then stop acting like there's a stick up your ass and kiss me like you mean it." He hesitated for a second, then did. When they reached the bridge, Naruto didn't need the sun to see what was left of Zabuza, his subordinate, Tazuna, and Inari. Zabuza's face had been largely unharmed, with the exception of his lower jaw, which protruded like a lump in a sheet. The swordsman's head had been smashed and looked like a deflated ball. The jugular of each body had been split open, leaving any clothing close to their necks stiff and discolored. Tazuna hadn't been dissected as thoroughly as the others. His front had deep gashes, but hardly any of his flesh was missing. As this was going on, the ninja and Inari's chest cavities had been opened, and the ribs had split apart without considering the breastbone, spreading out like the wings of a butterfly, each side hanging awkwardly where the muscle that held the pieces of separated bone together was still present, though some of Inari's and Zabuza's friends had been broken off and scattered around. They were nearly empty inside, with whole organs missing, including the liver, lungs, and heart, as well as a large section of Inari's digestive system. Although he had also removed some flesh from the arms and one of the other child's ears was missing, it seemed that had been Naruto's primary source of nutrition. The three of them stood silently for a long time. Naruto's mouth started to water at the sight of so much human flesh, which annoyed him. Since when did he prefer human? A stomach growl at this moment would have been, to put it mildly, inappropriate, so he was glad he had eaten recently. Sakura averted her gaze from the bloodshed and coughed. Naruto briefly feared that she would vomit once more. "What should we do, Uzumaki-senpai?" He sighed and threw a sealing scroll to each of her and Hinata. "Move each one onto the array, then apply chakra to make them disappear." In order to avoid touching all of the bugs that had gathered on the flesh, Sakura, who was extremely squeamish, carefully dragged bodies by their clothing and dropped them a few times. Hinata tried to follow Naruto's example of avoiding them, but when he focused past the smell of death, she was releasing the same disgusted and startled odor as Sakura. Naruto also avoided them, but he didn't mind grabbing onto Zabuza's wrists or ankles to move him onto the scroll. In an effort to avoid feeling overburdened by the small rolls of paper, they walked solemnly back to Tazuna's house with just what their 4 scrolls contained, not bothering to gather all the ribs that were strewn about. Although Tsunami didn't appear to be surprised, Sasuke assumed that didn't really matter. What do you mean? In order to give her a sincere, contrite look, Kakashi removed as much of his body weight from his crutch as he could. We've collected their remains and can bury them for you, if you would tell us where, he said, because the mission was failed, we do not expect full payment. After tossing her head back and forth and letting out long, tearful sobs, Tsunami eventually fell to her knees, covering her red face with her hands and panting as she sobbed in front of them, clutching the hand the friend she had been staying with had given her. Team 7 and Shunin Uzumaki tried their best not to move uneasily. With a voice laden with something, Naruto Uzumaki stated, "In this case, I don't think payment will be necessary at all." "No," said the daughter of Tazuna, her eyes narrowing in rage. Her friend yelled, "What do you mean? No, like hell you're paying, your father's dead." With her mouth twisted into a grimace, Tsunami turned her tear-filled eyes to the blonde and said, "I'll pay." "Uzumaki-san is right," said Kakashi. "In a case like this, there will be no need for payment, you've suffered enough." With a shaky lean on her friend, Tsunami stood slowly and said, "I'll pay for a different mission. This is Gado's fault because of him. Our village is dying, my father and son are dead, because of him." As he watched her talk, Sasuke could actually see the fear spreading across the faces of Uzumaki and Kakashi. She focused on the Chunin's face, likely because he was the most senior ninja here and had not been seriously hurt. "I don't care about the price, I'll spend the rest of my life paying it off if I have to. I want revenge for my father and son. Please, for me, for my father, please, kill Gado." Instead of being sad, angry, or any other emotion Sasuke thought the blonde should be experiencing at the moment, Uzumaki's eyes were staring into the wall behind her now. His entire body appeared antsy, with weight shifting from foot to foot. He suddenly became motionless, refocused on Tsunami. He nodded cautiously and slowly as Naruto prepared to depart. Hinata kept a close eye on him. He was extremely careful with his weapons and clothing, making sure that the pouches of each weapon were fastened to his person, that his black boots, which were better at preventing foot fungus in such a marshy area than ninja sandals, but not as effective at channeling chakra, were tied tight, and that, in general, everything he owned was in perfect condition. Naruto had previously stated that he had enough chakra that it wasn't really a problem for him to work through the thick soles. Although his heart rate and other indicators suggested otherwise, Hinata believed he was anxious and merely attempting to postpone his departure. However, she decided to wait for him in silence despite the fact that her heart rate was elevated. There was now another opportunity to fulfill Kakashi's promise to allow her to accompany Naruto on his mission to kill Gado. While Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura remained behind, she and Naruto would be heading straight to Gado's hiding place. This time it was dangerous because Sasuke, despite not yet exhibiting any obvious symptoms of a concussion, most likely ought to have one following a blow to the head like the one he had received, and Kakashi wasn't in fighting condition. Sakura was the weakest member of Team 7 in combat and would essentially be their first line of defense. However, as Naruto had noted when Kakashi appeared reluctant to release Hinata, Tazuna was dead, and nobody genuinely cared about them, particularly when they were hurt. Their biggest challenge would be figuring out how to buy more food with the limited funds they had and how to ration the food that was left in the house. Naruto straightened up and turned to face her. "I think we're good to go," he said. "Finally," she said as she stretched and slid off the bed, not looking forward to the run. She turned her ankles slightly. The average person would walk. That made tracking, hunting, and preventing pursuit easier, not Naruto. His mouth was set as he once again met her stern gaze. She needed to remind herself not to blush and to try to control her thoughts when he did that. He most likely had no idea how sexy he looked. "Remember, while we're on a mission, do as I tell you. I'm not gonna helicopter parent." He let out a sigh. "Yeah, that this is a mission, and if I do something that seems to you to be patronizing, it's because you're an asset to Konoha. Okay? I'm not being stupidly overprotective, I'm being smart." "That's a first," she said with a laugh. He arched an eyebrow. She put her arms around his neck and pouted when he didn't return the embrace, placing his hands on her forearms and stepping back. "Oh, come on, lighten up. Hinata, this is serious. This is an assassination and, actually, That's what Team 7's specialty is supposed to be, so you should be taking this even more seriously. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Are you nervous? How much field work have you done, exactly? What counts as field work? What have you done, apart from T and I?" Hinata scowled. He sighed, "Not much really. General C ranks. Anything ranked higher was always with T and I." "So this is your first time, too?" Naruto sighed. "Sure. I mean, I've tracked him down once already and I've killed people. But this is your first time putting it all together?" She looked up. "Hey, then we're on the same page. Who've you killed?" "Okay, we're sorta on the same page anyway. If you mess up, I won't judge. If I mess up, we're dead." "You're dead evidently. I am indestructible," she reminded him by tapping her neck. Naruto gave a snort and began to leave the room. When he withdrew and blinked at her incomprehensibly, she yanked him back and pressed her lips to his urgently, smiling syrupily. She explained, "Since you're apparently going to your death," before leaning in and putting her arms around him once more. This time, she stepped in and pressed her front against his, feeling his cheek heat up against hers as her breasts began to squish against his chest. "Remember how this feels," she said in his ear, "and don't you dare die before we get home. I want to see what it's like to make out with you on our bed." Feelings had a flavor. Naruto might have said, yes, if someone had asked him that question previously, so this wasn't exactly new information. There was a bitterness and a saltiness in the air when people were about to cry. Joy was sweet and effervescent. There was no longer any question about that nagging feeling he had when he was angry with Konoha. The thing that had caused him to wonder if he enjoyed seeing people in pain or fear. He had been too preoccupied with soothing Sakura to notice when she had been afraid of him. It had been a little closer when he had threatened that man to get him to tell them where Tsunami was, but he hadn't felt it until she was kneeling in front of him. That desperate situation. Her entire range of emotions had been leaking out and filling the air, including fear, loss, pain, anger, and pain. What would she do without her father? She loved Inari so much that she hated Gato. She was afraid of him, afraid of Naruto, and afraid of the ninja because of how strange they were. She had seen him and Hinata together, and she knew how they felt about one another. She didn't think it was unfair that they had a happy ending while hers had ended badly. She wanted Gato to suffer, to feel this, to be hurt like she did. It had tasted good, damn it, blood tasted tangible and physical, but everything that had come from that miserable woman, as if she would have done anything to make Gato feel the same way she did, was something entirely different. As they ran, Hinata trailed him by a few paces, their movements bolstered by chakra to maintain their pace. To be honest, it would worry him less if she wasn't there, so he didn't turn around to see if she was. When he had been there previously, Zabuza and his friend had apprehended him, scraped a few of his internal organs, and he had escaped given that it had been days and the missing nin hadn't arrived to collect his pay. Gato was likely aware that Zabuza was dead, and the tycoon had most likely hired additional help to adequately guard his hideout because Naruto had snuck in. He might have even realized that some of his belongings were gone. Suddenly the little fort Gato used appeared. It wasn't exactly hidden because there were roads leading to and from it, but there weren't any actual walking trails in the woods, primarily because the plants there were so hostile. It's possible that Gato chose this spot because of the prickly vegetation, or that he deliberately planted seeds here because he anticipated people would eventually be hiding in the trees and attempting to survey the area. Even if you were prepared to get scratched all over, it was absurdly difficult to get close because of the lovely, tree-free perimeter that surrounded it. Now that Naruto had escaped the first time, every car entering would most likely be closely inspected. Very close to the entrance, they were on their stomachs beneath a good deal of thorny foliage, with tiny creatures scuttling into their hair and clothing as if they had always been there. This was primarily because both of them were trying their hardest to stifle their chakra in case someone could sense it. Naruto in particular, as his was quite distinct from anything that would typically be found in the wild. However, neither of the two people watching the fence seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. In reality, they were competing to see who could spit the cherry pit the furthest. Plan A, he whispered, we ride in on a car, then break into the building. Once we're in the fence, we'll use a genjutsu to stay hidden. On the car or in the building? Car, probably. Building, too. Hinata nodded and continued to scan the road for any indication of a car approaching. She appeared tense, though it was difficult to tell given their situation. If we're caught, you get next to me right away, and we blast, and that's plan B. K. A very terse reply, undoubtedly tense. In a whisper, she said, your chakra's a little bit more noticeable now. Perhaps he was the one who was tense. He gave himself some leeway because he had been running with parts of his abdomen missing the last time he saw that fence, so it made sense that it would make him twitchy. He heard the gate opening with a creak. A modest gray vehicle pulled out and started down the street, lowering one of its front windows as it went. Shortly afterward, a slightly bigger van approached from the other direction and stopped in front of the fence. "Hang on, ID check," one of the men inside called out. After performing a textbook shunshin, Naruto flattened himself against the van's top, hoping Hinata would have the common sense to aim for the bottom. One fortunate benefit of the absence of sunlight was that the metal felt cool to the touch. His whole body blended in perfectly with the dark paint job thanks to a basic genjutsu. After the doors were opened and the interior was inspected, the van slowly made its way into the courtyard and toward what Naruto thought were parking spots. He jumped off and slid beneath another car 2 spaces away before it had even stopped, pausing for a moment to simply stare at all the cars. They weren't brand new, but because they were so costly, people generally avoided them. Perhaps he simply didn't see many of them because they weren't used by ninjas. A large, unwieldy machine was more difficult to conceal than a person or nin animal, less taxing on the chakras. Given that he had far more than the typical person, perhaps he could pull it off. That was something to consider later. He bided his time until Hinata approached him. After a few seconds, she did, breathing through her nose loudly but quietly. After some time, they discovered a small, unlocked window high up and managed to clumsily squeeze inside, arriving at what appeared to be a one-person restroom. Hinata sputtered, "There's no one around, and no one heading this way." "K." He stretched for a moment, "You alright?" "No, I'm half left." He disregarded that. "Chakra?" She gave a nod. He said, "That can be rough." With a stutter, he didn't feel any different, not exhausted, but perhaps a bit sweatier and itchy from all that contact with the prickly plants and insects. She straightened up after taking a deep breath. "I'm ready to go. Where to?" "We're gonna go to his office. He shows up in there at least once a day, and it's pretty early, still. Despite the pitch-black sky." After leaving the restroom, they hurried to the location that Naruto remembered Gado's place to be if he hadn't practiced. It might have been hard to stay silent in his boots because the floor wasn't carpeted, only because Zabuza's friend had been a bit too irresponsible about returning to the box containing all of Gado's pilfered scrolls had he been apprehended. Gado's office door wasn't locked. Even though Naruto had a lot of concerns at that point, they entered anyhow. "Make sure to scan with Byakugan before you touch anything other than that. Just relax for now, we're just gonna wait." Gado was very neat, arranged all of his pens and stamps in the adorable little drawers on his desk, and kept all of his folders in a tidy little filing cabinet. It's very clean, but there are no pictures of family members or anything, and there are no tiny marble glasses with pens protruding like flowers. Hinata wandered around, looking at the desk, the chairs, and the pictures on the walls, while Naruto sat against the wall and just stared. She eventually began going through the files, removing each manila folder one at a time and quickly scanning them. Naruto had already completed this task and had written down numerous names, places, and dates in a little notepad that he carried with him, but he had left it at home. There's no reason to bring it back only to lose it for a foolish action. "Hey, come look at this. I've probably seen it already. I think it has to do with what's going on sky-wise, the permanite." That was novel. "Come look." Peering over Hinata's shoulder, Hinata was hogging the written letter on the first page. He grabbed the remainder of the file. A map of the village was displayed, with tiny X's indicating specific locations. 3 in areas they hadn't yet seen, 1 at the shipyard, and another close to the bridge, each equally spaced from the others. With hesitation, Naruto connected a star by drawing his finger along invisible lines. That caught my attention. 5 was a significant number since there were 5 different types of chakras: fire, lightning, water, wind, and earth. Basic seals typically used 5 focus points to collect energy. A pentagram was usually the safest option for any jutsu, especially in the early stages of development, but the more sophisticated they became, the less they adhered to the standard shape. Hinata held up a few and said, "There's a bunch of receipts in here, for weapons." No matter how hard he looked, he had been unable to locate those weapons. Whatever Gado needed them for or where he had obtained them wasn't in any of the other files. When Naruto had been skulking around, had he kept this one with him? What had caused him to abandon it today? Blah, blah, blah. New state of things means that the service I've requested is no longer necessary. I ask instead that you deliver the shipments to the location enclosed. On Wednesday afternoon there, you will find your payment. He read the letter he received from Hinata on his own. She grabbed the diagram, like a summoning circle. His eyes jerked to her. "What do you mean?" "Just the way it looks with the 5 points and the road curling around one side. Like, it's not actually, but it sorta looks like one." He looked at the diagram once more. There had to be sacrifices for summonings for small ones. A drop of blood was sufficient. Additionally, those who had contracts with Konoha were fairly submissive and only asked for that. He was aware that some had attempted even less effective methods of drawing attention, but for some reason, nothing was as effective as blood. However, others summoned some desired human sacrifices, others desired animal sacrifices. Something sufficiently large to be called forth by a circle that is only marginally smaller than a town. And those weapons, All of them. What was the location Gato was supposed to meet them at? She handed him a picture of what appeared to be a warehouse, with the number 29 nearly fading off the door. Here. This I know where this is at the shipyard, remember? Hinata's eyebrow went up. He folded everything to fit in the pouch that hung at his waist and put everything back in the folder, saying, "Come on, we're leaving." "I thought we were waiting for Gato?" "Gato's gonna be here," he said as he waved the picture. "Because the person who ordered all the machetes is gonna be here, giving him money." "Today's Wednesday." "I think so." As they made their way back to the restroom they had entered, Hinata growled, "What happens if we go to this place, and Gato doesn't show up?" In response, he said, "Then we come back and kill him after having taken a detour, but I have a feeling we shouldn't ignore this," before leaping out the window. Hinata was panting considerably more heavily when she landed close to him than she had before, suggesting that he had been running faster than usual during the absurdly lengthy run to the shipyard. His suspicion had been right. A sleek, black car was parked on one side of the yard, but there was no sign of vans or trucks that might hold boxes of sharp objects. They approached slowly, came to a halt near the back door, and Hinata, who was now starting to flush from exertion, used her bloodline to peek inside. "It's just Gato in there, well, him and his guards, no one else." "Think you can handle one of them?" "Yeah," she said, with a nervous expression. Now, they simply walked through the door without making an effort to be quiet, not bothering to be cautious. That was for the best. Aside from a few suitcases of cash that whoever had been arranging with Gato had left behind, the place was nearly empty and illuminated by fluorescent lights. "Who the hell?" Gato interrupted as Naruto delivered a single, devastating blow to the man next to him. The business magnate glanced anxiously at his other companion, but he was engaged to Hinata and was losing badly to her gentle fist. Naruto took the manila folder from his back pocket and said, "I have a few questions for you." "And who the hell are you?" "I'm from Konoha's torture and interrogation department." Naruto laughed, "And, like I said, I had a couple of questions. If I like the answers, you get to go." He was going to die. It would be quick, though perhaps. The businessman was less daring. Away from his base and without bodyguards, he nearly bit the cigar he was holding between his teeth as he asked, "Well, what? For starters, who is the person you were expecting to meet here?" With a nervous shrug, the businessman sneered, "Like I know Anonymous." "I don't like that answer. Killer intent, teeth and eyes." Gato retreated, but he lost his dignity and scudded backwards, tripping and landing on his ass. He gestured to the briefcase obligingly to Naruto's left, saying, "I don't fucking know. We just got a package with half of that, requesting several shipments of weapons, and later got another one telling us where to put them." With each page of the file fluttering languidly, Naruto waved it back and forth, asking, "You don't know anything beyond what's already in here?" "That's what I fucking said." Gato managed to gather himself enough to get back up and give Naruto a fierce look, disregarding the ash that was falling down his shirt. "How unfortunate for you." Having already defeated her opponent, Hinata took the hint and immobilized him with a barrage of accurate, chakra-powered jabs, allowing him to fall back and hit his head on the concrete floor. Leaning over him, Naruto inhaled the aroma of perspiration and the rich fight or flight hormones that had just surfaced. He took hold of the man's collar, sat him up, and smiled as he dragged him in several long steps to the wall. Naruto put a piece of paper in the man's lap and said, "You're going to do something for us as soon as you regain movement in your arms. You're going to sign your name right here." On top of it, Hinata dropped a pen. Gato looked at it, then spat awkwardly onto it, dribbling some onto himself as well. "You'll have to kill me before I do." Hinata herself took another sheet from a pouch. "We've already got a copy, with your signature forged, so the end result will be the same no matter what, but we think it'll be a lot more impressive coming straight from you. Go to hell." Naruto gave Gato a clear view of the inside by tilting his head back and opening his mouth wide. He grabbed his wrist. "Hope you're not left-handed." The crumpled mess of a contract before her made Tsunami gaped. The first sheet, that is the more intriguing one, which the bastard had signed with his own hand, appeared to have had a rough day, but the official one was immaculate and professional. Was there blood there? Hinata tapped the line next to the one where her family's tormentor had shakily scrawled his signature. "You sign there, and the local branch of Gato Inc. is all yours, including all the current assets. You should be able to fund the village until trade's picked up again," she explained. "And he's dead," Hinata brightly stated. "Officially, he's on vacation right now, but when he doesn't come back, he'll be missing, and, eventually." She was totally unprepared for the woman's arms to wrap themselves around her and hold her in a painfully tight grip. "This is," Tsunami withdrew, blinking frantically to contain her tears. "Uzumaki, right? The village her father's dream." Hinata gave a blink. "Yeah, when that bridge was completed, it would require a name." I can see why you would think that, replied Kakashi, and I agree there is something unusual about the setup. Naruto tried not to wrinkle the picture in his hand as he asked, you can't think of anything that calls for weapons to be at each point of the star? He would not be pleased with himself for needlessly destroying evidence. Unfortunately, no, but I'm not the village's expert on sealing, you know that. The third might know some more, but no promises. Anyways, at this point, we just have to get home if you're right, and this does have to do with summoning, and I believe you're correct, he said quickly as Naruto opened his lips. Then whoever made the order probably won't be interested in Tsunami. They'll investigate, and once they realize all she's doing is taking money out of Gato Inc. and using it to fund Wave, they won't be concerned by her. They'll do some more digging and want to figure out what we did. It's our job right now to get out of here and let Intel figure this out while we recover. Naruto scowled, re-slid the picture into the file and closed it more, frowning. Go shower, lights out in an hour, unless you want watch? The word, try, is emphasized in, nah, I'm gonna try and sleep. Gato screamed a lot. By the way, what, exactly, are the chances Gato had a copy of a contract that would transfer Gato Inc.'s assets to any person who signed it just lying around? Naruto smirked at that. I'm shaky on the statistics of that one, but I can tell you that the odds of Gato having a contract that transferred another company's stuff to him are pretty nice. So are the odds of him having a typewriter in his office and Hinata and I making a return trip with a fresh copy of his signature. Kakashi gave him a longer look. Be careful when doing unnecessary stuff like this, you get Konoha in legal trouble. You can bet there'll be repercussions. Naruto gave a serious nod, but he really wasn't in the mood to worry with whatever was in the local branch's treasury. He could bet she'd do a good job of restoring prosperity to the village, and Tsunami deserved it. Even though he hadn't yet brushed his teeth and the taste of blood hadn't disappeared, Hinata greeted him outside with passionate kisses. Inserting her tongue into his mouth, he pushed her away. I have news for you, she said, licking her lips while keeping her gaze on his mouth. Good news? Ever wanted something named after you? For the first time since they became friends, Hinata fled Naruto's house when he was 8 years old. She had never slept at his house before, with the exception of the one time when they were 6 and he foolishly left his door unlocked. One of his favorite memories was of sharing his house with someone, even though it had been a completely new experience. He had to awkwardly push her away from the sink when he needed to spit out toothpaste and try to make breakfast after nearly 2 years of only eating raw meat and eggs. Weary from being scolded, crying, and stumbling to his side of the village and then recounting the entire event to him, he best remembered staying up and simply staring at her while she slept in his bed. He was ecstatic that he finally had a friend staying overnight, that it was Hinata, and he wondered how anyone could do something so horrible as to make her feel unwanted. Over the years, this occurred multiple times, and sometimes she would simply stay over without asking, but one evening when he was 13, she came over to his small apartment and stayed there permanently that night. There was also a great deal of crying. She got his shirt wet while he hugged her and rubbed her back. At that point, he had been avoiding her for some time, but he found it difficult to do so when she was so upset. Soon after, he relocated to a larger location. A larger bedroom was required because the bed they had shared as children was no longer big enough to accommodate both of them, and despite his desire to keep his distance, he slept better knowing she was beside him. Even though Naruto bet the other tenants' rent was lower and their utilities were much more dependable than the Uzumakis, they were granted a larger kitchen, a nicer bathroom, and a landlord who hated them both but couldn't turn them away when the third himself vouched for them. Hinata dropped everything she was carrying, stretched, and then immediately lay down on the first piece of carpet she saw, arms and legs spread wide as if she were hugging the floor. As soon as they unlocked the door and entered the small area they had set up for shoes, coats, and other items, Hinata grabbed Naruto's ankle as he kicked off his boots and stepped over her with his belongings, planning to put his dirty laundry in the hamper and sort the rest. What? She pulled, forcing him to take a step back until his feet were directly beside her head. He was certain that her nose appreciated this, especially considering how much his sweaty toes had smelt after hours of walking in boots without making any noise. She began to move his foot around until he repeated, "What do you want?" Grinning at him, she said, "We're home." That sounded, for some reason, like the first time she had said it, like the first time he had come home and she had been there to greet him. Wiggling his toes, he inserted his foot beneath her bare stomach, causing her to roll onto her back due to the ticklish sensation. He then dropped his belongings and went down on all fours above her, lowering himself onto his elbows to make it feel more like an embrace. She smelled like Hinata, which was a wonderful scent by default, but also like she hadn't taken a shower in 2 days and had spent one of those days walking in the bright sun while carrying heavy equipment. Her fingers grazed his back through the material of his jacket, moving over his torso, under his arms, and finally settling close to his shoulder blades. "You smell like sweat." Well, you don't smell like roses, either, Hinata-chan. Wanna take a bath? Together? Yeah. Shaking his head, he said, I'll pass our tub small? She sulked and said, I'll let you wear a swimsuit. It tended to go quickly because as soon as he walked into the laundry room, everyone else left, freeing up the machines. That sort of defeats the purpose of bathing, though. You take a bath, I've gotta unpack, maybe toss some stuff into the laundry. Hinata acknowledged that she had been harassed by some older men while she was getting the mail a few years prior, but she claimed to have handled the situation on her own by using genjutsu and gentle fist, which he didn't question. He kind of let her handle self-defense because he didn't want to deal with her getting upset with him too often and because he didn't want to be the one to jump in and help every time, which would only make her feel worse. When he discovered shadow clones when they were children, he attempted to have one follow her around as a covert bodyguard. When she saw it, it immediately went kaput and not only punished him with a kunai to the groin but also gave him a hard time when they next met in person. She flicked his ear and said, if you're not joining me, I'll just shower, so you can go after, too. Don't put it off, I can't snuggle up against you if you're stinky. We're snuggling now. He started to get up, but she sneered and pulled him down again by his collar into a kiss, likely bruising her lip because he hadn't been prepared at all and a lot of his weight went right onto her mouth. Nope, she said, slapping her lips on the P. You were lying on top of me with no invitation to do so. I might add, they had to really practice kissing without hurting anyone. He tasted blood. Hinata looked at him almost as an afterthought, but then again as her tongue moved around in his mouth for a while before breaking the kiss and licking over her split lip and once more. She had a strange look on her face, her cheeks flushed but otherwise blank. You okay? He asked after a few moments of him staring at her, her staring back, and him sucking on her lip. She appeared to return to earth after blinking. I have to tell you something. When those words were spoken in that tone, nothing positive ever happened. Shoot. The day we woke up in Tsunami's house, remember I woke up before you? Yeah, and then you saw Sakura. Before that, I wasn't exactly me. It wasn't any better. Naruto waited. I was thinking differently when I woke up. I woke up on top of you, but you weren't, Naruto, to me. I wasn't processing that there were 3 people in the den as my teammates. I knew where everything was, including the location of the kitchen and how to get there. It wasn't as if I was seeing everything for the first time, but it was different in some way. I began eating anything I could get my hands on as soon as I arrived. When I reached the refrigerator, I devoured nearly everything that was there, even the uncooked meat we had stored for you. It wasn't the same as the previous times I had some. Instead of making me ill, it sort of brought me back to reality. That's when Sakura and I first met. Another consequence of this contract of theirs. What did I do to you? Naruto felt his heart sink as it approached his small intestine. You saved me, she said, her anxious face hardening. Naruto, you're the reason I'm still alive. You did this when we were 6, you did this in Wave, you keep fucking. She said, her eyes wide, her mouth twisting in rage, her hands now fastened on his arms, the nails digging in so painfully. In a few quick motions, a basic move that let you out from under a larger opponent and in a position where you could do more damage, should you have enough space to break free. She was on top of him, and her hands were pushing his wrists down into the carpet with so much force he could feel his circulation cutting off. Long, dark tendrils of hair slid past her shoulders and tickled his neck. I'm gonna say this once and for all, I am grateful that I wasn't killed on the bridge, Naruto. That I'm still here with you and not buried in Wave with Tazuna and Inari makes me very grateful. Do you prefer that I be dead? Hinata's chakra even reacted to that, and he jumped back with a startled gasp, staring at his face, feeling his canines grow even larger than they already were and protruding over his lip, the scars on his cheeks tingling horribly. No, Hinata, he uttered slowly, I would prefer you to be dead. I would have preferred that nothing had occurred on the bridge. Can't I fucking be angry that you were hurt? I suppose that wasn't an option, and I suppose we'll have to deal with this. Yeah, you can be upset about that, she said, her face softening. Even though it wasn't your fault, you act like it was when you're feeling down. I don't want to argue about this. Then stop talking and pay attention to me. He did, and she looked so shocked that she seemed to lose her train of thought for a few seconds. He watched her gaze at him, her white eyes moving over his face, his dusty jacket, and his hair, which he knew was filthy and likely needed to be cut soon. The small cut had healed, but he could still see the result on her face. Listen to me, she said again, softly, and kissed him lightly. I love you, okay? It's really painful to witness when you start acting as though you're unimportant or unworthy of happiness, don't you think? He was shocked to recall how unpleasant it was to crave blood when it was right in front of you, and even worse when it was inside of you and all you had to do to get at it was make a small cut. You were simply not permitted. He watched her lick her stained mouth without realizing it. Getting up, he said, "Come on, we're going hunting." "What? I take it you're craving meat?" "Yeah. I am. Too. Let's go into the woods and catch some rabbits while we're still filthy. After that, we'll take a shower." Hinata held his hand tightly. It was almost 8 o'clock, and Hinata was very purposefully keeping him in place by sitting in his lap after using her nicest smelling shampoo and a little perfume in the right places, keeping one hand on the back of his neck and rubbing exactly the way she knew he liked, and occasionally kissing whichever part of Naruto was closest until his eyes slid closed and he gave up all pretense of watching TV. In the end, Naruto's wish to unpack the same day they got home was disregarded in favor of feeding on the wildlife and cuddling on their couch after a shower. Or at least she was working to make sure it was. She had been praying for a repeat, but there was a lot of angst in the way, and there were creepy new body functions that needed to be addressed. She listened to his breathing over the hum of sitcom conversation, and she observed that it had been a really shitty couple of weeks. She kind of wished it had gone a little better for her in terms of Naruto's affections. That moment after he'd woken up and gotten all sweet on her for a few minutes, that had been nice. Naruto shifted and sat up a bit straighter. She closed her eyes and acted as though she was asleep while he assessed the situation. Fortunately, he didn't try to get up and instead just turned off the TV and slid down so his head was resting against the armrest. She fought the impulse to kiss him because he would make her move so they could use the bed, or worse, unpack, but she was too comfortable to do that at the moment. He had a straight nose, blonde lashes to match the shaggy hair that had begun to fall into his eyes, and 3 lines on either side of that gorgeous face. She waited for a long time for his heartbeat to slow down again before she could raise her head and look at him. Then, giving in to temptation, she kissed each cheek and then his lips. He whispered, "Hinata, we should move to the bed," without opening his eyes, but he slid down so his neck was no longer at an awkward angle, which also pushed her farther down the couch. She slowly rose to her previous position near his face. "You were awake?" "Yes, you were, too." She brushed her fingers through his hair, which was not particularly soft but still enjoyable to touch, ignoring the slight to her ability to pass for sleeping. "What if we just lay here?" She kissed his jaw and chin several times. "We'd be sore tomorrow morning, but we'd have to get up to go to the bed." He finally opened his eyes to look at her, saying, "And then we could sleep on a mattress." It was strange how quickly she had adjusted to the cat-slit pupils. He closed them again, and she kissed his eyelids as well. His arms grew tighter around her. "It's your call. I can sleep tonight without hurting my neck if you get off of me. But when you're clinging to me, how can I leave you?" Even though he was still keeping his eyes closed and his head tilted as though he was too exhausted to notice, she purred, kissed his mouth, opened hers, and slid her tongue past his lips. When he eagerly responded, she did an inward fist pump. He said, "That's your problem," and tightened his hold on her. And she chuckled, "Not yours? It's your neck, but still?" "Correct." She repeatedly kissed his face and neck, saying, "I'll get off if you promise to give me lots of goodnight kisses tomorrow, too." She was shocked and a little let down when he actually released his grip on her and started pushing her away so he could wriggle out from underneath. She was then thrilled because he picked her up and walked to their bedroom like a scene from a wedding night fantasy. As Naruto curled up around her, Hinata sighed, "I never caught that promise." Their bed was dusty from a few weeks of not using it, but it wasn't that bad. Naruto repeated, "Promise," and she felt the sound tickle her neck. "I really think we should seal the deal with something." His only answer was a snore. If he had to describe it, he would say that Enko exuded an aura similar to what it would feel like to jump naked into a freezing lake while being watched by a hungry bear, if there was such a feeling. Naruto generally believed, in private, out of fear of terrible retribution, that any new ninja should avoid her if they wanted their brains to stay healthy. There was, of course, the much more likely scenario that Ino was, in fact, completely insane from the start, and that Enko's influence could do little more than add to her array of innuendos. Ino Yamanaka was one of those few who hadn't given any thought to what Naruto thought, privately, for fear of terrible retribution, and had come out on top that much more scary and less adverse to exposing skin. Perhaps this was because she and Hinata had become friends while still in the academy, and some of that stubbornness had rubbed off on her. Following in her father's footsteps in T&I, Ino, who shared a cell with Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akamichi, sat in and took notes while Inoichi himself delicately applied seals to Naruto's skin to better concentrate the energy so that the two of them could have a better view of what had transpired on the bridge. "Just relax and close your eyes," he recalled, feeling concerned. The men who had come after Tsunami hadn't let anything slip while they'd been fighting, but he could guess. "Try to put yourself in your shoes just before you left the house to go after Inari," Inoichi said in a soothing voice that blended with the soft scratching of Ino's pen, and very quickly, it seemed, He was standing in Tsunami's kitchen rather than shirtless on a cozy chair with ink and chakra conductive oil slathered on him. Yamanaka's chakra spread out over him, initially only spreading over his skin, following the path the grease had made for it, but then rapidly gathered in the seals and started to feel as though it was soaking through his skin. Naruto, who wasn't a sensor type, could still feel the energy gathering. Okay, now remember to keep calm, breathe, he said. What ought I to do? Tsunami shakes like a leaf and turns to face him with frightened eyes. Remain here, I'll go after him. He won't be hard to find, don't worry. He doesn't follow Inari. Instead, he heads straight for the bridge, not because he suspects Inari might be there but because he knows Hinata will be there. It is not only not his responsibility to protect the bridge builder's family, but Hinata is far more significant. Before he can even see her, he can smell her blood, but once he does, the missing nin dies before he hits the deck, but by then Naruto is holding onto Hinata, feeling for a pulse, looking for breathing. That delicious red is still spilling out all over the deck, but much slower than a healthy heart would give. This one is already slowing down, beginning to match the leisurely way the blood drips from between the planks to dye the water underneath. It's her lips that make him lose it. They're normally a nice pink, but they've changed to the same color they were when they were children and eating flavored ice, an eerie bluish violet, like the tips of a corpse's fingers. Then he is in the demon's sewer, screaming, sobbing, and eating the monster's flesh while arguing and watching as the beast kisses her and licks her neck, causing her to sit up almost as if she were herself again. He feels the monster's hissing, telling him that this is either ignorance or apathy, and that it's the last thing he'll see with his human eyes, so he'd better take it. The sky grows darker. He feels pain. His body rips itself apart to rebuild something supernatural and sinister. He's in too much pain to tell it to stop talking. He's no longer even him. This is an animal in a man's body, but not completely. There's still enough of him there to see Zabuza, and something, neither him nor the fox, whispers, wrath, like a good night. He feels it running through him, and he punches the dead man as if he can still feel the blows. He claws at the body, bites it, kicks it, and makes guttural noises of displeasure every time the grotesque face bounces with his movements. Zabuza isn't enough to quench his tantrum. He moves on to his friend, raking his sharpened nails over Tezuna's chest as he passes the man, and slicing both his and his grandson's throats open as a small modicum of anger appears at the sight of them, too. He spreads the ribs and tears through still warm flesh, chewing and slurping and sucking until he's had enough of the child, but not enough to sat him. He then moves on to Zabuza, eating through the hiss of gluttony. By that same quiet in-between thing in his head, Inari comes last, and he can't get enough of the tenderness, the taste of clean, untouched flesh. There's a bitterness to it. Inari's brief life was filled with grief, but that only heightens the meat's flavor. The marionette hasn't moved since she sat up at the fox's command, but now she turns and his eyes suddenly go to her. She doesn't seem to mind, but the movement itself makes him uneasy, and he releases more energy from his skin until her white eyes look back at him. He is awakened by her scrutiny. What was she looking at? Envy. She is a doll, a thing, and she is his thing, greed. And what had diverted her attention from him? Vanity. He crawls over the child's body, across the deck, to her, leaving blood trails on the wood. The doll doesn't react, and he doesn't expect her to, so he keeps moving his cherry-hued fingers over her arms, taking her wrist and examining her work-calloused hand, then dropping it and tracing her nose, brows, and lips. Instead he pushes her down and straddles her, and she looks up at him silently, obediently. With empty eyes he brushes her arm tentatively, then grips it tightly, the drying blood on her skin rolling into tiny flakes at his touch. Her body does not react to him as he desires, and she does not move with him as he desires, so instead of immersing himself as he would like to, he licks her skin, touches himself, and imagines what it would be like if she were awake. Hinata is not desirable in this way. He jolts half awake at the thought of her name, jerking away from her body as the sudden onslaught of pain hits him hard, and he goes into a brief unconsciousness that seems to last less than a second, long enough for sloth to reverberate in his head, before he is awake and conscious once more. Love. He is watched by Hinata, but not, who, as before, does not react when he pulls her into an embrace or when he tilts her head back and licks over the break in her skin like Kyuubi. He focuses on the desire to talk to her and presses his lips to hers, and then all of a sudden he is blind. The darkness envelops him, cold but not hostile, and he senses a slowness creeping into his limbs that is distinct from the one he is used to. Hinata. It annoys him a little that he can't smell her even though he can feel her arms around him and her hair in his face. Naruto? Is that you? Even though she has a firm hold on him like steel rope, her voice is uncertain. He commands, come back with me, and she stops. He is unable to see her because he is not supposed to. The living are not supposed to see this place, and he is already violating several important laws by touching and listening. She is kissing him quickly, coldly, and insistently, whispering, "You are Naruto, but you're different. Come back with me." "To you?" "To me," he concurs. "Naruto, what did you do to yourself?" He wonders what his whiskers look like now as her fingers move over his cheeks in this darkness. He feels cold everywhere, especially where she touches him another gelid kiss. "I struck an agreement with the Kyuubi you can return if I give you my blood." "You acted carelessly, Naruto. You can't see yourself at the moment." Her icy fingers move like ice water through his hair, tracing his nose and brows. "How do I appear?" Breathless at the feel of her cold hands on his skin, he asks. "Not as you once did, but I also love you in this way," she says. "Come back with me." Hinata to me with her shoulders trembling and tiny puffs of air escaping her nose. He can feel her laugh more than he can hear it. "Take me, you have me." The same taste of impossibility was now running through his veins, and when they kissed this time, he had bitten his lip until it was bleeding, and she made a sound of surprise at the taste. The cold subsides, and Naruto decides it's safe to open his eyes, so he does. They're not back on the dock, but they're somewhere in the middle. The Hinata in front of him is whole, unblemished, and naked, and so is he, but it's not so much sensual as it is vulnerable. No part of her soul is hidden here, and his is just as exposed. They kiss again, and more power builds up behind Naruto's breastbone, which he thrusts to her. She gasps and grips his shoulders, and either the chakra or the touching causes him to change once more, becoming less himself and more the animal from the merger. Grasping her hair, he pulls her head back to reveal a smooth, virginal skin, veins still throbbing with blood as though she hadn't died yet. "Are you scared?" "Yes." She doesn't want to acknowledge that he scares her or that any of her thoughts about him are similar to those of the villagers, but he can tell by the way her eyes start to well up with tears. He lets go of her hair and draws her close to him, kissing over the salty traces on her face and calmingly massaging her scalp. "But you love me?" With much greater conviction, she says, "I do." She tilts her head up for a kiss, but he reciprocates, causing her lips to only touch his chin. "Do as I say," she says. "I will," then tries again, and this time their lips briefly meet. The kiss has no power, but he still returns the kiss. She writhes in pain. It's just too much all at once, too hot and intense and unnatural for her to take, but it's what she needs to live again, so he keeps his hand cupping her head so she can't turn away and interrupt the process. Then, he whispers softly when they split up, "I'm yours." Their eyes meet again, and she's too shaky to smile, but he's smiling and holding her to him, feeling how her cold, dead body heats up now that his chakra is pulsing through it. Their lips meet again, and he releases everything. All the chakra that will anchor her soul to her carcass, everything she needs to move, breathe, and live again. After that, it's finished. The sky is horribly, exquisitely black, the vassal is sleeping next to him, and he is back on the dock. The results of Hinata's checkup are excellent. Her heart is beating normally, her reflexes are excellent, and her vision is perfect as usual. Everything is great, but there isn't any oxygen in her blood. Well, there is some, but not nearly enough to sustain a human life. She looks helpless and very new, and she gives them a comforting, "I'm sure it's just an off day" response at first. The medic Nin laughs at the reading and says, "The oximeter must be broken. She's walking and talking, so there's just no way she's that low on oxygen." They try another one, and another eventually. She's asked for a blood sample, but by then, she doesn't think they're going to get a different reading than what the pulse oximeter gave them. "All of the other tests indicated that I'm in excellent health, so you know that I feel fine. I promise I'll come back if I get dizzy or anything else happens." Naturally, it didn't, so Hinata spent the remainder of the day lying in bed, gazing at the blue veins in her elbows and wrists, and scratching her arms and legs a little to see them heal seconds later with hardly any visible damage. She woke up to the sensation of Naruto lifting her head to pull a pillow underneath it, but she couldn't recall falling asleep. "What time is it?" she muttered. "8. Take a shower if you're awake." When Naruto continued to stare at her, she yawned and then arched an eyebrow. "What? Is there anything you recall from the bridge?" "No." "Oh, I see. I thought we had already discussed that today you had a meeting with the Yamanaka?" "Okay. Are you aware of what took place?" She sat up. "I asked for you to have clearance to the file, so if you want to, you can look at the notes," he said, not smiling at her excitement. Ino took notes on everything. "So she finds out before me?" Hinata pouted. "That's not fair." When he didn't smile, she got out of bed and cuddled up to him, saying, "I'm just kidding. Thank you for requesting that of them." She could feel him blushing and was about to ask him what was bothering him so much when he whispered something that made her freeze. He kissed her gently by the ear and then pressed his cheek against hers. Would you please repeat that? The fucking stutter did occur, but this time she felt it was warranted. The words, "I love you," he declared. Hinata passed out.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.